Welcome to the Oregon Department of Transportation building this morning. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bruce Hanna, and we'll get to a little bit more. I'm with Grace here, and we'll get a little bit more on introductions in just a little bit. I want to remind everybody, if they would, to take a look at their device and make sure it's quiet. There's always something, that doesn't matter if you're at a wedding or a funeral, that somebody's phone. So let's do our best to keep those silenced. You know why we're here. I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm encouraged by the group that has agreed to participate, and I look forward to some of the very difficult conversations. I think tension is okay, that's fair, and that we'll probably have a little bit of that, but the goal is to get a program and a funding package to the 2027 session and see if we can't change the way Oregon moves forward with safe and efficient transportation systems. So it's going to be a very interesting process, and we all know there's some other external things going on in terms of the ballot and other things. That's not what we're working on. We're working on a package that we can take forward, and so I hope you'll all keep that in mind. We're going to work towards coming up, as I mentioned, on a transportation package that we can take forward into 2027. And I think that's going to be a good thing. I'm going to just go on a little side note here. As some of you know, I spent a term as co-speaker with Arnie Roblin, and I told some of the staff we would probably lock you in a room and say, don't come out until you have a solution. and there's something to be said for that. And if you look back at that cycle, we not only were co-speakers, we had co-chairs of every single committee. You can't imagine the grief we took for arranging our government system to respond and act like that. But if you look back and review the session, or you talk to people who were here during that session, a lot of good things happen. So I liken that a little bit to this particular committee and the work group that we have. There might be a time we lock ourselves in the room and say, how do we move forward? And what's the best way to do that if we can? So with that, I'm going to start with some introductions here, and I'll go to Dan. Start us off, please.
Thank you, Chair, Co-Chair. Dan Dorn, and I'm one of the three commissioners of what Governor Kotek declared the legendary. So one of the three commissioners in the legendary Umatilla County.
Very well. Gail?
Gail Castillo. I am a business owner, and just recently retired or removed myself from the Hispanic Chamber chair. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me.
Good morning. Good morning, Lisa Sumption, Interim Director of Yoda. I'm Kelly Brooks. I'm Governor Kotek's Transportation Advisor, and we'll talk to you all about my later. So,
I'm Jeff Gritz. I'm the union rep for Labor International. I cover Oregon and Southern Idaho. Grew up in Eastern Oregon, born and raised here in Oregon.
Tyler Frisbee. I run the Institute of Metropolitan Studies at Peltz State University. I also sit on the TriMet board. Born and raised in Central Oregon.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Nofield. I'm co-founder, chairman of the State Lodging. We're a hotel operations and development company with properties primarily through Western Oregon.
Good morning, I'm Julie Brown, General Manager of our Valley Transportation District in Medford, Oregon, and also the chair of the Oregon Transportation Commission. And
Ted's online. Ted, do you want to go next?
Thank you. I'm Ted Odlin. I'm a longtime heavy highway contractor in the state of Oregon. I served as AGC's chapter president many years ago, and I had the privilege of serving as National AGC's president in 2010 to 2011.
And there's two members that are not with us today. Jim Trent has a business conflict that he couldn't move, and Chris Hagenberger, did I get that right? Hagenbomber, sorry.
Yeah.
He's traveling in Europe and is not able to attend today. So they'll be joining us as time goes on. And I'm Grace Kreniken. I'm a co-chair here with Bruce, and I'm a former director of the Oregon Department of Transportation, and was a Fed for a while at the Federal Transit Administration and Seattle DOT, and I left my career life at BART down in San Francisco in the transit system down there. So
terrific. And as I said, I'm Bruce Hanna. I served 5 terms in the Oregon legislature. And one of those as co-speaker. So I had a very interesting career in the Oregon legislature in business. I'm a Coca-Cola bottler in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And as Patrick and I discussed, we're both in the hotel business as well. So lots of similarities. It's fun to be in the building. I look at pictures of past members of the Transportation Committee and so forth, and see a lot of names and faces that I know. And so it's great to be a part of this. Kelly, I don't know time-wise, we've been in great shape until
Great, so I mean, we can have a special guest. Based to interrupt me from time.
Right.
And so if you're okay, I can go ahead and kind of start getting into the background section now. And then I'll set aside and I'll just get out into it. Does that sound good?
that sounds perfect. Thank you.
Great. Can I? Take my little. Here. Is that true?
For audio.
Yeah, it's for the mic.
But that means I can't see. Okay, it's gonna be great. Oh, I can see.
You
it right
also
there.
feel very
Okay.
far away.
All right. No, I'm good. This is perfect. I can do this. Okay. Do not pull mic. Should I move it closer to me? No, leave it right where it is. Okay, so this mic does not it does amplify. All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So the goal of this part of the presentation is, I'm gonna start from the beginning. You all are here in large part because in many ways, you've been a little bit removed potentially from some of the active work over the past 3 years, right? Because we do need to kind of come up a level and take a fresh look at some things. But you really can't do that work or embark upon it without some history and background into where we've been. So this is the very condensed version of some of that history. Just know as we go, this is not the end of what you can ask for, information that you may need or background that you would like to have. There are a lot of folks that can plug in and be responsive to help follow up on the things that I think you're probably going to have more questions about when I get to the end today.
Are you gonna be sending us these stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to send these and we'll post them. I think it's not my best presentation I've ever made, but I do think folks who would like to have it, I've promised a bunch of different people, so we'll make sure you have it as well. Okay, so here's what, at the end of this, I hope you have some idea about. What were the major elements and funding mechanisms that were in our last transportation package? So that was House Bill 2017. And you all probably know this, but a handy rule of thumb is it was in 2017. So when I talk about House Bill 2017, that was about 10 years ago. 2025 was the one we worked on last year. The next thing is there was quite a bit of work that was done leading up to 2025 by the Joint Committee on Transportation. And I want to share that with you because there was a lot of outreach and engagement work that they're proud of, and kind of give you some background there because it's information you'd probably like to have as well. Then there was House Bill 2025B. So that was the funding package that was in the legislature that passed the Senate. Ultimately did not pass the House. I think it's important for you to know what was in there. So what were the major policy elements and funding tools in that one? Then we're going to go to House Bill 3991. And that was the legislation in the special session. What was in it, what wasn't in it, and why. And then last but not least, well, 2 things. There's the referendum. What parts are currently subject to that? What would remain regardless of the outcome? And then finally, we did do some budget changes just in the recent short session. Where were those dollars coming from and where did they go? Like I said, it's fairly dense, but I'm going to go slow. And this is not the last time you get to ask me about any of these things. So let's start with House Bill 2017. It was a kind of a massive step forward for the state of Oregon in terms of what it tackled in terms of transportation. So the 4 primary focus areas, as I would say, were congestion relief, multimodal investments, maintenance, and accountability. Those will sound probably familiar themes as we continue on. But congestion relief, there were a lot of projects that were identified around the state. I can't remember the total number, like 40 some odd projects that were named in the bill for construction. But there were 3 in the Portland metro area, 217, I-205, and Rose Quarter. They're kind of called out as separate. for urban mobility projects and needs. One of the funding mechanisms for that and one of the key objectives of that bill was to set up value pricing or tolling in a meaningful way. So that was a part of House Bill 2017. Then in terms of multimodal, the state established its first ever dedicated source of funding for transit, and that became the State Transportation Improvement Fund, or the STIF. It also made a permanent Safe Routes to Schools program, established ongoing funding for off-road trails, and created ongoing dedicated funding for Connect Oregon. Connect Oregon had been around for a long time. Just for those that are unfamiliar with that, that is what had been set up, used lottery dollars to pay for port improvement projects, aviation projects, ultimately bike ped projects. So this was a path to make sure that they kind of weren't coming back every cycle to seek the lottery funds, but had a dedicated source. Like I said, maintenance was important. The maintenance focus really here was though on, this will become important over time, maintenance projects. So dedicated funding for bridge, seismic, and culverts was a part of the House Bill 2017 bill. And then last but not least, accountability was important back then too. So there was some requirements that were established related to benefit cost for projects. There was the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee that was stood up, which Ted referenced that he's been on. There were a series of audits and the requirement to establish a transparency and performance website. So there is a lot more than that in that bill, but just know that those are some of the kind of major themes that were really important at the time and were incorporated. So how do we pay for it? This is hard to say. I will give you this separately, but there was a gas tax. It was a 10-cent gas tax, and that was phased in over time. So 4 cents in 2018, and then 2 cents in 2020, 2024, and 2022 and 2024. That really went to the Highway Trust Fund and the 50-30-20 split that you'll hear a lot about as we go. But there were off the tops for major projects, those congestion projects we talked about, and Safe Routes to School, or some of those were pulled off. So that means we took the money for that before the split occurred. There were triggers, and when you get the presentation digitally, you'll click on that link. What ODOT did have to do a series of things before they could get the next fuels tax increase. So it's a lot to that, but just know that's part of that accountability as well. Then there was title fee increases. So $24 in addition to the base title fee was included, $20 increase in registration fees. And those had already been in existence, right? We already had a gas tax, title, and reg fees. What was new was the addition of the employee payroll tax at 0.1%. That was that dedicated funding source for transit. The privilege tax, which is 0.5% tax on in-state new vehicles, that is officially paid by the dealer. And then a 0.5 tax on out-of-state new vehicles. Weight mile, I don't know if y'all know this, but if you don't, I'll tell you. The Constitution does require that we balance between heavy and light users across the system so that one isn't paying more than the other. But weight mile fees and taxes are collected in a different way. And so when you raise the gas tax, you do need to raise the weight mile. So there were significant increases there as well. And then there was our very first ever bicycle excise tax, $15. And those were dedicated to off-road bicycle and pedestrian and commuter path. So like I said, just giving you a snapshot, kind of what did that bill do and what were the funding mechanisms within it? All right, so where did it go? Just at a high level, you can see that we had the most amount is going towards ODOT projects at 28%. Next up is counties, that's a 50-30-20 distribution, cities, and transit. Well, actually, transit is higher, so that's significant. Transit's at 21%. And then you have debt service. Part of the way that we got to those projects was to issue debt on those funding increases. So we got to pay that off. You have the dedicated urban mobility money and Safe Routes to School are the main ones. The point I want you to kind of hone in on that's created sort of the challenge, the ongoing challenge that you all are all here to help us solve is that dedicated 2% for ODOT maintenance. Turns out that hasn't been enough, right? So when you hear that transportation funding is, I mean, I hate to just say it's complicated, but it is complicated and it always comes with strings, whether it's at the state or the federal level. And so what that left behind was really about a small percentage in terms of what's available to do the maintenance work itself. So to pay the people that plow the roads, do the day-to-day. Okay, I'm gonna get now into more recent history. So heading into 2024, the ODOT did a transportation funding needs analysis. And I've got that report here. It is in your reading library. It identified, I'm gonna say it, a somewhat crushing need. I think it was $2 billion annually that was needed if you were really gonna kind of bring the condition into a state of good repair. That document fed into the Joint Committee on Transportation's work. That picture in the middle is one of 12 roadshow meetings that the Joint Committee had all around the state to hear from stakeholders about what transportation issues are most important to them. And then they did stand up a series of interim work groups. So one on maintenance, one on public and active transit, and one on finishing the 2017 priority commitments. Those work groups started in 24 and continued into 25. I'm highlighting that because we have work groups too. And folks might ask you, what are different about your work groups? So we have 6 of them. They are focused in similar content areas as well. But work groups were a part of House Bill 2017. They were a part of 2025, and they'll be a part of this work as well, because we have collectively a lot of expertise in the state that really needs to be brought to bear on the solutions. And this is a way that we can help do that. All right, accountability. So I also have gotten kind of a lot of questions here too. So we'll get into this more as we go, but there were also some major reports and reviews that were done on the agency with respect to accountability in 2025 that informed the thinking of the legislature as they were developing that package. The first is an audit. I believe it was certainly in the news. There was a forecasting error where ODOT overprojected the amount of money that would be available. And so there was an audit, which I've linked to in the presentation if you want to dig into it, looking at what corrective actions needed to be taken. They have made significant progress there, and I can give you the status of that in detail if you would like. But it is an important milestone that was discussed quite a bit in 2025. The next thing that was done that I think will be of use to all of you is there was an external expert review panel that ODOT commissioned. So ODOT brought in US DOT, or not US DOT, but former DOT heads from all around the country, some current, to look at the work of the agency with respect to the fiscal issues that were highlighted in the audit and project delivery. There's a set of findings there. Many of those are in process, and you'll hear more about those as we go. Last but not least, there was a legislatively commissioned managerial review. And that was really important to the legislature to do that separately and independently. And those elements of that review also fed into the provisions that you'll see that have been included in legislation that I'll talk about in a second, and ongoing executive actions that need to be taken at the agency. So,
Kelly?
yes. Yeah.
People may have questions if you
Yeah.
want to take those at the end of your.
Oh, no, you can interrupt me anytime.
Pardon?
You can stop me anytime. Does anybody have a question? Yeah.
So I just want to sort of extend that because you're going kind of fast.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure for clarity's sake, if someone has something that they take the time, and it's hard to see Ted on screen. So Ted, if you just raise your arms or just speak up, I think that would be helpful. Sorry.
No, I appreciate it. Please do. I will, as you get to know me better, I am both Southern and talk fast, which is a super odd combination. And I do have to be reminded to slow down. So if you just raise your hand and I'm happy to stop, we'll also have time at the end.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
That's one of the.
All right. Okay. Let's talk about TRIP. TRIP was the nickname of the 2025 transportation package, House Bill 2025. I'm going to start with some of the major things that were initially proposed. Some of those things dropped out at the end, and I'll make it clear what those were. So first, the initial proposal actually considered indexing the fuels tax, which probably will pop up a little bit later in terms of something other states do. It also proposed a one-time system use fee on vehicles at time of purchase, which would be in addition to the privilege and use tax that are in place today. And then there was a novel tire pollution tax, 3% on tires. And then there was mandatory road user charges for EVs, plug-in hybrids, and 30 MPG. Does everyone here know what road usage charge is or have any familiarity with what that means? Okay. It's where you basically pay by the mile, right? You have, instead of paying the gas tax at the pump, you are charged based on how far you travel at a rate that's set, an equivalent rate to the gas tax. So we've had a voluntary program, it's called RUC. We've had a voluntary program for a while. What you're seeing in 2025 is that it's becoming mandatory to participate. It's not voluntary anymore. Reclassification of diesel as a motor fuel tax. We have had a somewhat complicated system of collecting the tax for diesel users really at the point of sale, which means there's a lot of diversion. It's hard to do. That's not how regular gasoline works. So reclassifying that so that it can be captured at the rack or at the wholesale level is a change that was proposed to really help with efficiency and reduce diversion. Simplification of weight mile tables themselves. I mentioned that our freight users, they pay for things differently. So they pay based on the type of vehicle they are, the loads that they carry. Heading into 2025, I think there was, I don't know, 75, I don't remember how many classifications there were. It was complicated. And it was cumbersome and difficult for truckers to use. And so there was a desire and a proposal to simplify that down to 10 different rates instead of a bunch. And then, last but not least, ODOT accountability. There are ODOT accountability provisions proposed and included in House Bill 2025. When we get to House Bill 2025B is what actually kind of passed. So there was an initial proposal, a series of hearings, and also a series of negotiations that happened between legislators that ultimately resulted in 2025B. That, at that time, increased the state motor vehicle fuels tax to 52 cents a gallon. It increased passenger vehicle fees from $43 to $75. It created a new diesel tax. It made that change to the diesel tax system so that it's collected at the rack. It increased title fees up to $312 and it collapsed a bunch of things down. It made RUC mandatory and set forth a timeline of when those fees would be mandatory. And it also created a new road user charge fee specifically for delivery vehicles. So think Amazon trucks, UPS vehicles. It increased the employee payroll tax. So that funding mechanism that was established for transit back in House Bill 2017, it tripled that over time. So it took it from 0.1 to 0.3. It increased the privilege tax and it increased the use tax and it simplified weight mile and included some specific provisions related to balance and parity. And what I'm going to do over time is this will be the thing you see and it will show what's changed. It will look a little messy, but best I could do. All right. So that didn't work. We didn't get that bill out. So what happened was we had just, oh, yes, do it.
Can I ask you to take a little, I guess that was a really helpful overview.
Oh, yeah.
But I think part of why we're all here is not just to look at funding options, it's to look at what a transportation vision is. So can you take 2 seconds and talk about what, besides the funding increases, people were getting as part of HB 2025? Unless I jumped ahead in your presentation.
No, you're not wrong. The key themes from a policy perspective were back to basics. So creating dedicated and ongoing funding for maintenance was a high priority. Being able to finish the House Bill 2017 projects themselves. So what we have 217 that's done-ish. I think it's done. I think it's closing out. We have 205, which is still under construction. And then we had Rose Quarter, which had been under development, but hadn't started. So there was a lot of energy around like, what do you need to do and what changes do you need to make as an agency? We said we wanted these things and you need to get back to them. So there was some interest in that. But I would say another major policy, like priority really was this equity and balancing issue between heavy and light users was a driving focus for them. So truckers had been overpaying for some time and wanted to make sure that they were coming in and addressing kind of the imbalances there. And so I would say those, and then like, there was a lot of ongoing interest in transit, and we had, it was, I'm gonna try to answer this the best way. I think part of our struggle with the policy conversation is so much of what we were facing wasn't something that was new or a change, but existing systems that were underfunded and were not performing in the way they'd been originally envisioned, whether that was on the project side or the transit side. So it was about trying to get to some basic level of functionality across the whole system. Anything you want to tell, anything, Tyler, that I should include in that you think I'm not mentioning?
No.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and I will also say, so tolling, everybody loved it 2017. People loved it less in 2025. So there was a lot of concerns and opposition heading in like 23, 24, 25 in terms of that funding mechanism was now viewed much differently, honestly, from a lot of the folks that were in the implementation zone within Clackamas County in particular. So very different feelings about that. When we can talk about more of that later.
Kelly, I want to mention this because over time, this is going to come up.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about inflationary cost increases and so on. And when we get down to where we're headed, we need to be able to answer to people. A title fee increasing by $139 is how big of an increase? Is it 5%? Is it 12%? Is it 30%? Is it 50? I mean, at some point, we got to be really honest and transparent with everybody and say, here's what it is. So I know that might be getting into the weeds a little with today's presentation, but at the point we come forward with a plan, you have to say it.
No, I think you've, right, yes. And it is something that gets lost. I was noticing when I was pulling this together as you're kind of telling the story, that proportionality aspect is really important over time. And also just recognizing the world we live in today, right? People have cost pressures today that they didn't have 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 8 years ago. And being able to put it out there in a way that shows you what does this actually mean in terms of the percentage of increase, I think is really helpful. And I will work to do that. Okay, so 2025, sine die, what we had was the unfortunate situation of an adopted budget that assumed revenue from a transportation revenue package that did not pass. So ODOT immediately had a $354 million deficit, which meant it kicked off a series of announcements related to staff reductions, maintenance, facility closures. And so the governor called a special session and said, hey, we have this situation where we assumed revenue that didn't come to pass. So we need to come back and at least address this, you know, this hole that we have in the ODOT budget. So we worked hard to pull something together that was smaller. You'll see the gas tax as an addition of 6 cents. The registration fees are $42 increase to the base. And we did have a $30 supplemental EV fee because of that was how we brought the EVs into parity. I won't go into all the details there, but we included that as well. It's important to know for later. And then title fees went up by 139. Now, I just want to tell you from that what you're seeing in terms of that high title fee increase was something that the legislature really felt strongly about in terms of affordability, because the reg fees you're paying on an ongoing basis, the title fees you're paying at time, you know, you're paying one time and can kind of roll into cost. So that's why you're seeing that weighting towards the title was something that was important to them. House Bill 3991 included the exact same accountability provisions that were in 2025. We did not change them. It included the weight mile simplification and the mandatory road user charge, not for commercial vehicles, but for everybody else, and the highway cost allocation methodology update. So when you get this sent to you, I can't remember, when you get this sent to you, this will be helpful. But what I've done is I've gone in and adjusted the table so you can see the difference between what was in House Bill 2025 and what was in 3991, right? So you were gonna have the, you know, get up to 52 cents a gallon with, you know, a 2025. Now it's 6 cent gas tax increase. And so I've tried to do the math for you in here, and I've crossed out the things that were not included at all. So the rough delivery fee vehicles were out. The increases to the privilege tax were out. The use tax were out. So those things were not included anymore in an attempt to do a more streamlined focused package. What was assumed is that all of the money that we were bringing into the highway trust fund was split 50, 30, 20. The payroll tax, instead of tripling, doubled, so it went from 0.1 to 0.2. And it was also sunset. So that was a payroll tax increase on transit that ultimately had a sunset on it as well. I believe it's 2028 is the sunset date. I think that's right. January 1st, 2028 is when that payroll tax increase then would sunset, because the legislature had a lot of questions about the payroll tax. And so that's what they put in place. And that was signed into law. And then there was a referendum. So there were enough signatures qualified to send certain components of House Bill 3991 out to voters for approval. The components that were sent out are the revenue pieces. So the 6-cent gas tax increase and the payroll tax increase. Okay. All right. Okay, he's coming. Okay, I think the governor is coming in, but I also can't read lips that well. So I'm gonna keep talking because when she comes in, she's gonna come in and you're all gonna say, great, the governor's here and it's gonna be great. So she'll be here in just a second. But just to make sure this is clear, because I do think you'll want to know this piece. So gas tax 6 cents, payroll tax increase, those are on the ballot, right? If everybody votes yes, we love those, which I'm gonna tell you is not likely. Then there's an additional $400 million a year that goes into the highway trust fund that's split 50, 30, 20. So ODOT gets 200 million a year and the cities and the counties get the other 200. And then there would be a total of about $120 million that would go to the STIF, so the transit program. If it fails, then those two mechanisms go away. So we still have that EV charge, the 30, but they didn't repeal that. So the $30 for EVs is still in effect. And you still have all the policy elements of the bill. You have the mandatory road usage charge, you have the weight mile simplification, and the change in the diesel tax, regardless of what happens. Yes.
So the weight mile goes into effect, you're then gonna be short. The fact that they were put together, so we're gonna be short that amount of money and it's gonna be off. The trucking auto balance is gonna be off, is that right?
Yes and no. So the weight mile kicks in, and we can talk more about this later. When the weight mile changes become operable are a few years out. So I don't believe we have an immediate problem with cost responsibility. I'm looking at Travis to confirm.
Only the existing problem.
We have the existing problem, but I don't create a new problem with cost responsibility. But you're raising a really important point. When we're changing the inputs and the outputs, it does have an impact then on the weight mile. So because I'm going to be collecting less in light duty vehicles, at some point I'm going to have a problem with heavy duty vehicles paying more. There is, however, in House Bill 3999, kind of an auto refund mechanism, which we should also be aware of too. So if we're too out of whack now, then we have an automatic requirement to reduce fees accordingly. That's actually in House Bill 3999 and it has not been referred. So in the out years, we actually have an automatic mechanism to do refunds. That'll cause other issues too, but we'll
Just
save that.
briefly, does that come as a refund or a credit?
It would come as a rate change,
It would come as a rate change.
right? So I have to adjust your rates moving forward because you're out of balance.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which is what the Constitution tells us to do, but now there's a formula in the bill for what out of balance means, right? Okay, so that passed it, got referred, qualified for the ballot. Knew we were not going to get an answer on that right away and knew we still had a problem. So when the legislature came into session in February, they pulled together a budget proposal. You know what I think is happening? I think they're waiting on me to walk out there to come get her and me talking. No, I'll do it. You guys can talk about it. I think I have to go out there to go grab her and then otherwise you're going to listen to me talk forever, which is not the point of today. Okay.
There we go.
Stop waiting.
That's been for a long time. All well. I'll get it.
I got one. How are you? Nice. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Good morning. Governor. Hello, Sally. Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry to interrupt your presentation. It was good. Okay. Am I on there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for letting me just pop in. First of all, I want to say thank you. I think when people get asked by their governor to do something, I'm always very conscious because I know people have going on in their lives. So when people say yes, I'm very. This is a very important conversation that you're all taking part of, and I want to particularly thank my co-chairs. They'll be doing a little extra work, and I have a lot of confidence in this group and the technical advisory groups that will be supporting you. And I want to thank Kelly, folks on my team, and the folks at ODOT who are going to be supporting your efforts. This is an important discussion, as you know. We all depend on a reliable transportation system. And frankly, our system here in Oregon is showing its age. And we have work to do, as you know. I believe we're losing out on economic development in our state because we don't have the consistency and certainty that we need. Before that, for the business community. We know that our roads and our bridges are not as safe as they should be. And that is like the core function of government to provide safe infrastructure. And we also know that the funding streams that we have had historically in the state are struggling, not only for the Oregon Department of Transportation, but for our cities and counties. And particularly here at ODOT, you know, I've been meeting with workers for months now and talking with them. And, you know, the number of layoffs, folks who have left, the vacancies in ODOT are putting a real strain on our folks. And we should never take our talent and our people for granted. And those vacancies to fill budgetary challenges in the agency are really, really strained. And so I just want to say that out loud. I want to say thank you to all the employees who are staying the course, staying true to the mission in very difficult circumstances. What we have is just unsustainable and frankly unacceptable for Oregonians. We need to fix it. So your objectives, as we'll be talking about primarily today, is twofold. You need to develop a set of shared priorities and practical solutions to address those priorities. I think it's possible in our state, even though with the challenges we've had to get to this point, that we can share with Oregonians what it is we need to do and provide practical solutions to solve the problem. It's very important, and I will keep coming back to this as you know I interact over the months ahead. Very important to get a very clear understanding of where we are now, so we can help educate the public, and we need to understand where we're going. We have some very core needs that we have to meet, but we have to understand where we're going in the future. Those two things are really important. Also, I think essential in this situation to challenge ourselves, challenge all of us, challenge the assumptions, challenge the experts, really think about how we build the system we want to need for the future. And it's not enough just to identify the problem. I think we're really good at that sometimes. Like here's like we will write pages and pages and pages of the problem, which is very important because we have to, you know, people need to know why we have a challenge that we have to solve. But we have to have practical, affordable solutions to address that. So that's the other half of this. Once we know where we need to go, what it is we need to have, we have to talk about viable solutions to make that possible. You know, the successful packages we've had on transportation writ large here in the state that we've seen over the years have always had clear priorities. They have been broad and they have been bipartisan. And I know we can get back to that. And those packages have had broad support, and that is the purpose of these of this group, but also the technical advisory groups. A lot of folks care about transportation. We need to all be marching in the same direction. And we also know that when we make improvements, it's not just for the state, it's not just for the mothership of the Oregon Department of Transportation and the state highway system, but it's also for our local partners who feed into that system that are those day-to-day roadways and bridges that people depend on. I do believe we can deliver safe,
accessible and reliable transportation across the state. And our economic future depends on it, and our folks deserve it. And that is your task. It's not a small task, but remember, next year will be 10 years. We have passed a comprehensive transportation package in the state bill. Seems like a good time to get it. So we have to come together, find consensus, and understand what is important and how we have to pay for it. And I just want you to know that my team, my office, myself personally, will have your back along the way. We're here to support you. If you need something, don't be shy and ask for it. We'll do everything we can to get you the information you need. And to the general public who is watching today and the folks who care about this topic, I have confidence in this group. I have confidence of all of you who are going to be engaging in various public opportunities and providing technical assistance. Let's stay focused. Let's get the product we need and go into next year united to solve the problems for our state. So thank you for being here. And I think I might have time for a couple questions from the group here, if you have any. If not, you can get back to Kelly's presentation.
I'll ask you a question. So, what are you prepared to compromise on? Where do you feel like a challenge might be made, whether it's, the rules and regulations that we have, or our taxes are too high, spread it out over time, you want to address a big problem now. What have you thought about in terms of where you might compromise, Governor?
I don't know if there's so much around compromise, and I thank you. I think we all have to compromise. We all have to look at all the, puts and takes and build the best, most affordable, reliable, and viable package that we would have. A very important starting point for me is the basic ops and maintenance of our system. I was around for the 2017 package, and there was a lot of focus. We're going to make sure we have safe roads and bridges, and we're going to have consistent operations and maintenance, and we will continue to improve the oversight and accountability of ODOT so people feel confident. But if we don't have the basics met, really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And we can't just keep shuttling that aside. We have to have that as a core principle. And if that's not there, I'm not going to be very happy. We have to make sure we can maintain the system, and also understand that the transportation world is changing. Right, where we were 10 years ago is different. Do we need everything that we have today? Do we need new projects? We have to meet our current commitments as well. We had made commitments in 2017 that we haven't. So basic ops and maintenance, meeting our commitments that are on the plate before we go to more greater.
Governor, you said commitment, and we've heard accountability in the House Bill 2017, which, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, seems like a long time, right?
We were all younger.
Not as much gray hair. More hair, not as much gray. But one of the things that we've talked about this in our pre-meetings and so forth is this accountability piece, and you mentioned it. 2017, we had Highway 217, we had the 205, we had the Rose Quarter project. That, my words, not ODOT. I don't think anything's been done. I mean, other than planning, talking. So we passed the bill. We said, here's what's going to happen, and then it didn't. And again, this is a highway user, a fleet guy. We got to be able to go back to people and talk about, here's what we said we were going to do, and we did it. And I think that's that accountability piece, and I hope you'll help us address that.
Definitely. And, we've had a series of audits, analyses, reports that you are all going to have the advantage of. And we are following those. I want to thank our interim director. So thank you, Lisa. We are going to get a director here who can help guide us into the next year. So I think that's important. We have an agency that, no surprise, has morale challenges, vacancies. And we need the expertise within the agency to do the job. We'll be focusing on that. I will say under the 2017 package, we started off well. 217, I think, moved in good direction. I'm disappointed as well that we aren't further on. They haven't had the bridge. But I think we all have to take a breath. Remember, we lived through a global pandemic. We had supply chain issues. We had increased costs. I'm not saying that is the sole reason for some of the delays, but we could not have anticipated that. But it is important to get the Rose Quarter. It is important to finish that bridge. And we also need to continue to make movement on the interstate bridge replacement. So these are things that have been in the queue for a while that are really important. So I will be asking questions, are we focused on outcomes? Are we focused on having the right team in place to get there? And a little bit to your question, it's like, are all the ways we do business the right way to do it? I think sometimes we shoot for the perfect and we think it only has to be done a certain way. And I think I think we have other states who are perhaps more creative or have figured out different ways to deliver in projects. We can do that too. There's no reason Oregon can't be a leader in transportation delivery.
Anybody else have a question? Sure happy you came and appreciate you giving us a little bit of rah-rah,
Thank you.
because that's gonna be
You
necessary.
know, let me know what treat you like. I'll bring a treat, I'll bring, sweets, caffeine, whatever you need. But I look forward to coming back at the rate. So reading what's happened. So thanks everybody. And
Thank
I
you.
do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I was pretty much done.
You're supposed to be starting right now.
No, I know, this is not a bad thing.
Yes. It was fast.
So this is not bad. I will tell you, you don't have to bring it back up, but, the last thing I'm gonna emphasize before I hand it off to the folks that you're really gonna love to hear from, which is the folks that are gonna talk to you about the state of the system as it is today, the funding that we have today, and our future planning are gonna come up, you'll love them. And they have prettier slides, but we redirected money in 2026 from existing transportation sources like Connect Oregon, like projects, like Safe Routes to School, right? And we ended up moving nearly $300 million out of those programs and out of those projects into operations and maintenance. And that is why we do have a funded budget at ODOT for January 1 of 2028, and then another clip, right? The clip's still there, but we did help make sure that we can continue operations at least through this winter and next winter. We'll tell you, Governor didn't say it, but if there's one more winter that we head into, and we're talking about whether or not we can hire snowplow drivers, that will be a failure. So that reason was painful. It took away from things that people do deeply care about, but it did help us have some stability for the next little bit here. And it is why we will not see immediate layoffs or immediate closures depending on the outcome of the referendum.
Kelly, how were you able to, sorry, Patrick, do you have a question?
I did, excuse me,
Go ahead.
thank you. Does ODOT budget for capital reserves of maintenance projects typically, or do they just shift funds? Is it strategic and intentional to reserve capital monies for maintenance?
Ooh, Travis is gonna be the right person to tell you, but I'm gonna answer this at high level. So much of the money that comes into ODOT is restricted to capital funds. So it's predetermined, right? So think about, and a lot of that is from the Fed. So federal money, by and large, can only be spent on projects or the people that are developing those projects, it's predetermined. So, what you're seeing is it's really, what we then moved, we had legally restricted funds that we made available for maintenance and operations. Because the hole that I'm talking about is relatively small, but the $300 million hole, ODOT budget's $5 billion, right? So it's, yes, they absolutely are planning on the capital. You'll learn more about the STIP and how to plan those out. It's how to actually give enough money for the services.
Follow up to his question. So you receive federal funds, they're specified for specific purposes. And do those funds require matching funds in order for you to move forward?
Absolutely. Yes, and it varies. There's the formula matching amount. So if you take all the state money away from that match, you actually then lose the federal. So right.
So that limits what you can reserve for maintenance.
No, that's a good point. Absolutely. So I will tell you, if you're gonna succeed, you're gonna do an amazing job. We're gonna have a wonderful frame rate for 2027 package. If you don't, we will keep heading down this path probably of canceling projects, cannibalizing programs, and moving it to cover basics is kind of the path we're currently on.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, and not to get into this very far, Kelly, great, I think it's important that we make it clear that the highway trust fund is 50-30-20, or the majority of it is 50-30-20, and the 350 million that you just described didn't get split 30/50 or 50/30/20. So local municipalities, counties, we had to find the same holes in our budgets and refund or find areas to fund that. And we're even more handicapped than the state. And at the county level, most counties in the state cannot, by legislation, by statute, cannot use general funds for road maintenance. So when we start robbing things, we don't have that pool of money to rob from. And so I didn't mean to jump in or get too
No,
deep on some of this stuff, but I think it's important that if the trust fund is very much a partnership. I always give the governor a hard time. I said, if you guys are tired of collecting the funds, we'll collect them for you. But it is a very proven to be very successful because of the inner workings of the highway system, the county system, and the city systems. You may cross a bridge starting on the state side, the other side of the bridge, you may be in the county. So anyway, I didn't mean to go any deeper on that.
Kelly, when you described you took money from certain categories, some of them were safety oriented, and you put them into the operating budget. What was the mechanism for that? Was that a decision did that have to be legislated, or is that a decision ODOT made?
Absolutely, it had to be a good question. Those changes had to come from the legislature because they were legally, ODOT could not move the money with changes to law. Right, so a small example of that. There are all those House Bill 17 projects that I talked about, the main projects. Those by statute have to have that state money on them. So one of the ways we help solve for it is to change the law so that we can put federal money on those projects and then use that state money for operations. So yes, yes, they had to give us the legal ability to do that.
Thanks.
Kelly, might be a question for you, this might be a question for our co-chairs, but following up on Commissioner Doran's comments, my understanding of our charge is to build a vision for the state. We just heard from the governor who talked a lot about ODOT, but when I think about the state, to me, that includes the cities and counties. Is that the appropriate charge? Because it would be hard, I think, to really put something forward that's not focused on how people experience it, which is 27 jurisdictions in one bridge crossing.
Yes, you will see it in the charter, hopefully included and kind of how we're going to be bringing information to you today. That, I mean, I probably had 2 state focused presentation because I was on the state bills throughout, but it's about the transportation system overall, not just the state portion of that system. Is specifically the charge to this group, is to look at it all.
Tyler, I could tell you just from limited time we've been meeting as committee co-chairs and so forth. When I think the word state, what I think about is the statewide transportation system and how it impacts everybody down to the user. But I've heard from county commissioners and city officials, I mean, everybody's got a piece of this and they're all wondering, what does this mean for me? I mean, that selfish, which is exactly as it should be. How does it impact me? I think you're going to get down to that in a fairly intimate way, because they're all going to be watching saying, how does this impact what we do in the transportation system? So when we say state, or when I'm saying state, I'm saying statewide transportation system, not for the benefit of ODOT.
Right.
No offense
No,
that
totally.
way.
The
Yeah.
United States transportation.
Yeah.
And that includes transit, and bicycles and all that other stuff.
So Kelly, do you?
Julie has a
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it's not really a question, it's just a comment. I'm just listening to this, and as we're rolling this out and working on this, the one piece I think that we really miss out on is we do not educate our government as to how the transportation system is funded. And I'm sitting here listening to it and thinking, how many people really know the situation in cities and counties? How many people really understand transit? How many people? And so with this, we do all this work. How are we going to communicate it to the public? Because I think it's gonna be a core piece of making this work.
We'll have some of that discussion later on in the presentation. Good question.
Claire, are you ready to bring up Amanda and?
Love to kick it off. No, I was multitasking a little bit, so I'm trying to keep eyes, if there's anything that didn't make sense, you can call me.
Amanda, with that, welcome, and I think you have control.
Thank you, co-chair, members of the committee. My name is Amanda Pietz. I work for the Oregon Department of Transportation, and I oversee our statewide policy and planning, research, data, climate safety, and multimodal programs. And I was asked to come here today and talk about the Oregon Transportation Plan. Okay, eye rolls aside, I'm talking about planning here, but it actually is, I think, very foundational to the work that you're talking about, and can give you some good, I think, help and foundation and support. So the Oregon Transportation Plan, as the conversation you just had, is really, while it's developed by ODOT, it is a plan for the entire state of Oregon. It's required in statute. ODOT has to follow the policies in it. Local jurisdictions have to be consistent with it. So it does have some weight and some gravitas to it. It covers all aspects of transportation. So everything from how we select our projects to how we maintain, operate our system, the data involved in the decisions that we make, has all that policy framework included in it, and it's multimodal. It was developed over a 2-year period with a group very much like this group and many others like your subgroups involved. So we had around 200 people in total involved over that 2-year period, really deep diving into the issues, wrestling with how do we have transportation work for our users of the system throughout the entire state, recognizing Oregon is a very diverse state as well. We had over 2,000 comments throughout the period that we developed that plan, and those were all incorporated into the final document that was adopted in 2023. So it's fairly recent, had a big deliberation process, kind of diving into some of those nutty issues. And so they set a vision for transportation. Tyler, I think I heard you a couple times ask, what is the vision that we're trying to achieve here? So the vision that was established there is Oregon's transportation system supports all Oregonians by connecting people and goods to places. The bolded text there, I often hear the question, what are core function of transportation? It is connecting people and goods to places. That is our foundation of what we have to do, no matter the jurisdiction. We have a policy framework that accompanies that vision of like, how do we accomplish those things? I heard safety brought up a couple times by the governor, by others around this table. Safety is core and foundational. People need to get to their destinations without fear of losing their life, of serious injury, of fatalities. So saving lives is top priority. It takes precedence over anything else. So if we are doing some kind of project and we want the system to be faster, but it's compromising safety, safety is going to take precedence. That's the foundational policy there. We're also adding lenses to the decisions that we make. So in the vision statement, it talks about all Oregonians. And so we want to have that equity lens that we're making sure we understand how different people travel, what their needs are, and that we're accommodating that within the transportation system. We're trying to address climate by reducing emissions, at least not increasing emissions by the way that we build and maintain and operate our transportation system, and think about the changes of extreme weather as we're making our decisions. Now, foundational and underpinning all of this, I think we heard the word basics, right? So that's that next piece on that policy framework, which is maintaining the existing system. The vast majority of our people travel by our roadway system. That's a significant investment we've made as a state, and we have to make sure that we're keeping those roadways open and making sure people can get to where they need to go. Also, from the multimodal perspective, the system's not complete. We have gaps in our biking and walking network. When we talk about state of the system in a little bit, you'll hear a little bit more about that, but recognizing that filling those gaps, making sure people can get to their destinations is absolutely key. In the vision statement is goods movement. That's talking about freight. Freight moves Oregon's economy. It has to be efficient as it does that. So we have to make sure that we're understanding the needs, not just of the people movement, but the freight side as well, and the impacts that that has. Underpinning all of this and the success of getting our vision is secure and reliable transportation funding. That is the work that you're all charged with doing. It is still a challenge that we're facing and underpinning kind of all of this. So that's the general policy framework. The one area or two areas I'll dive in the plan a little bit more, and this is hard to read for me, so I'll try to read it from here. But anyway, this is our investment framework. So what we did in the policy plan is we said, what are the priorities for making investments? So as you look at this, I'll kind of work down the left side just for an example here, safety. We're saying the top priority is reducing fatalities and serious injuries. There is no loss of life on the transportation system that's acceptable. That has to be the top goal. The next goal in safety is reducing the severity of crashes. And then third, supporting utilization of the transportation system by maybe adding separated bike lanes. People feel more comfortable, safer using that transportation system. So let's focus on that kind of top tier of priorities that were identified by these diverse groups. So that's that saving lives, preservation and maintenance. We've talked about that a couple times. ODOT and many of our jurisdiction partners have priority routes that they've identified. For our system, this is a teeny tiny map, but we have something called Fix-It priority routes. We just updated those. There's 4 tiers, and they consider things like how much travel is on each type of roadway, major north, south, east, west connections. Is it a freight route? If the roadway goes out in part of it, are communities isolated? Is there no other way that you can get to some of those communities? So that's helped us to prioritize our routes and how we maintain our system, recognizing we don't have enough money today, nor even if we're doing these solutions that you're going to be talking about, we won't have all the money to maintain everything all together. So we have to prioritize and focus on those things. Moving to the right side of that graphic, then it's really talking about mobility. So I mentioned that there's gaps in the biking and walking system as an example. The focus and priority there is closing those gaps, specifically defined to transit stops, to schools, downtowns, and shopping centers. And then for transit, it's preserving the existing service. So those are the priorities. For the most part, and I'm going to have an exception here in a minute, they're not hierarchical in that you can only do the next one down once you've completed the first one. It's generally saying, though, we should put most of our efforts into the top things and some efforts into the lower things. From the roadway mobility standpoint, we actually have a policy that's a little bit contrary to that, because for many years we've said we have to preserve the existing system and make it more efficient before we're really looking at capacity adds. So if you look at the state system and over the last decade, we've increased road growth by about 2%. So a very small proportion, because we're trying to make the efficiency gains before we're adding the big capacity. And I'm happy to take questions all the way along. The last thing I'll show you for the plan side of things is a funding graphic. So I want to talk a little bit about what this is and what this isn't. So what this is showing annual funding kind of averaged over, pardon me. Sorry, averaged over the lifespan of the plan. So the plan goes out to the year 2050. So the average annual funding is around $5.2 billion. That is not ODOT's funding, that is statewide funding. So it's counting all state highway funds that go to the state, cities, and counties. It counts the STIF, the transit funding that you heard about. Doesn't have all the local taxes in it, but it's just kind of a general ballpark of how much money goes towards transportation in the state of Oregon. On the far right side of the chart, it says, here's how much we'd have to really achieve the vision and the goals to the full extent that we talked about in the Oregon Transportation Plan. So that's a doubling of funds. A boatload or maybe a busload, transportation down here, more funding. You can see a big proportion of that increase is for preservation and maintenance. So that's paving our roadways, fixing our bridges, those kinds of things. And that's not the gold-plated version of a road. That is trying to keep things in a state of good repair from a general standpoint. The plan also looks at, because that's a busload of funding, what are more incremental investments and what would kind of the proportionality look like to try to achieve the goals that the transportation plan talks about. So the incremental one is about a 20% increase. That's often what we see kind of from a federal increase standpoint. Actually, House Bill 2017 was around that amount in terms of an increase, and kind of shows the mix of funding there. So it's illustrative for you to just think about as you're starting this important work, and giving some context and frame of reference from a diverse group that deliberated and set this policy foundation for the state. The next presentation will go more into the state of the system. I'm happy to take any questions on the foundation side.
Read it back to the slide, please.
Sure.
What does ODOT do on electrification? What is that part of that?
Yeah, co-chair. So our transportation electrification program is federally funded for the most part. There are some state funds in which on Kelly's slide talked about some redirection of transportation operating fund and our lawnmower fund that went over. Those are used for community charging rebates, but for the most part, it's the NEVI funding, if you've heard of that program, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. A lot of dollars during the Biden administration that went towards that. We have over $100 million over the last 5 to 7 years that we've been investing in EV charging stations that are mostly the high-powered quick charging stations.
Okay, I don't want to get in the weeds on this. I mean, I put in a Rivian charging station but I didn't get state funds. Rivian spent money, I spent money. Where would the state put a charging station? I mean,
Sure.
rather than it being privately held. I don't.
Right. So the NEVI program is for the fast chargers on the major north, south, east, west corridors. So we have some on US 97, 101, I-5, and so on. And those are really to just do the backbone network of the system. So they're the fast chargers on our main highway system. So that's where a lot of the public investment is going. From the state funded side, it's more towards our very rural or low income areas that prioritizes charging for apartment complexes, for example, where maybe there's not as much private investment. So it's kind of matching funds in that side.
Last question.
Sure.
Is it a revenue stream then?
The state funds for electrification are part of the transportation operating fund, that lawnmower fund. So that is more flexible for non-highway uses. And a portion of that has been used in the past.
But the revenue from the charging stations comes back to.
The revenue from the charging stations goes to the private entity that develops it.
Here, Hannah, we've done that with our hotels where we've added EV stations in partnership with the state, where they'll rebate us back 50% of the development to get them installed.
Missing the boat. Catch up to this.
Not the state parks, like, that's where I recently charged on what felt like a public facility, where there's state parks charging. Sorry, Lisa, you're probably very well.
Actually a partnership with Rivian.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like, the ones in
State Parks now
Detroit,
pays the bill, but yeah.
the ones in Detroit, I was charged in Detroit when I'm going.
Right. So we have a few in that area. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. We appreciate it very
Yeah.
much. Any more questions? Ted, anything from you or you good to go?
No, I'm good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I'm still up here and I'll invite some friends up to the table. So
Okay.
friends, come join me. So you don't have to just listen to me.
Amanda, before you run away, real quick question. We're talking as a group, as ODOT, that your slide up there only had highway system expenses. Didn't have revenue or collection, DMV, permitting, licensing, all of that. Is this, and not to get into that, but is that something that you would expect this group to look at as structural change to ODOT so that we can have clear understanding of what and where and how?
Yeah, I think Travis Brouwer will later get into the different funding sources. The chart that I did have up there is inclusive of all fees. So it's anything that's collected that goes into the state highway fund, whether that's from the gas tax, registration fees, title fees, so on. So it did try to more encompass things. The only thing it didn't have is local fees that maybe your jurisdiction levies, those kinds of things. But we absolutely need a diversification of our funding portfolio, and Travis will talk a little bit
Thanks.
more about that. Yeah.
And I like the way you put the slide up.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner.
Amanda, can we take just a quick moment and have your cohorts now introduce themselves and just give us a brief introduction?
Absolutely.
Alex, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm Mallerie Roberts. I'm with the Association of Oregon Counties. I'm our Legislative Affairs Director, and then I also handle our transportation policy portfolio.
Cool.
And hey folks, my name is Nicole Sting. I'm with the League of Oregon Cities as the Legislative Director. I support transportation for the League on behalf of all 241 incorporated cities.
Good morning. My name is Tova Peltz. I am ODOT's Delivery and Operations Division Administrator and oversee project delivery and maintenance operations across the state.
Great. So I think actually as a nice prelude to the discussion that you had earlier, we purposely put this panel together because from a user perspective, our users don't really know if they're driving on a state highway, a county road, or a city street. It is a shared transportation system. People deserve to get to their destinations, and we all have a role in helping them to do that. And we all face similar challenges in helping them to do that, which you'll hear kind of in this presentation. So the purpose of this presentation is to give some frame of reference for really where are we today? What does the system look like? In some cases, we'll compare to what that looks like nationally. And we'll say, we'll give some preview to what that might look like in the future here. So to set that stage and some context for things, let's look at the road network. And so you can see on the table there, how many lane miles each jurisdiction owns. The county, for example, has the vast majority of the lane miles. Then that's also compared next to vehicle miles traveled, or so the utilization of the system. You can see a lot of the travel is on the state system or ODOT system. There's some statistics on bridges below. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. The map shown here, and the colors probably don't pop as well as they could, but this is kind of zooming in the Bend area. You can see the brown is a lot of city streets. There are some county roads that intersect that, the state highways running through. And then there's some purple, but it doesn't really look purple, light gray on the graphic here that is federal owned roads. So think about BLM land, Forest Service, and that's what that other column is down there on the table. And so as we go through this presentation, we're not going to comprehensively cover all transportation in the state of the system. We just don't have enough time to go through that today, but we wanted to give you a sampling of some major areas just to get a sense of what we're doing. So we'll start with pavement and bridges. Thank you, Tova.
That's good. So Oregon ranks 23rd in the country for pavement condition. And today about 87% of our 18,000 highway miles of pavement are in fair or better condition. But as you can see from the graph, this performance has been steadily dropping as funding and investment has dropped. And pavement conditions began to decline in 2018. This decline continues as the cost to pave rises and the available funding drops, and we continue to use the system with fewer paving projects. Starting next year, we will only be able to afford paving the interstates. So there will be a marked impact as a result of that. And we'll turn to.
Yeah, so more a little bit from the county perspective. As we note, for the county's really limited resources necessitate that nearly all of the county funding is going to preservation, so seal coats and overlays. About 71% of the county pavement is in good condition right now. Even with that increased funding from House Bill 2017, inflation really has outpaced those gains. And so the county pavement condition has remained relatively flat for the last 10 years. AOC estimates that without new revenue over about the next 5 years, more than 4,500 miles of county roads will go without critical maintenance work and then will quickly deteriorate beyond repair. Again, for many counties, they're in sort of a reactive maintenance mode due to limited resources, causes those facilities to degrade more quickly, requiring more expensive reconstruction, and is ultimately an efficient way to manage a system, which I think we'll go more into later.
Yeah, and I'll echo what my colleagues up here have shared. Resources increase from House Bill 2017 are insufficient to keep up with inflation and the growing demand for maintaining city streets. Despite the increase we saw in 2017, city streets are actually in worse condition than they were in 2016. And there's a link to the report at the end of this presentation that will be shared out that gets into that level of detail. One thing, just to put this all in context, if you're like me, big numbers can be hard to contextualize. Cities' lane miles could wrap nearly around the entire circumference of the earth. That is just a substantial amount of infrastructure to maintain. And what we're seeing is more potholes, more frustrated constituents calling their city council about those problems and the impact that that has on their cars. What I would also add is replacement costs as harder to keep up with maintenance. Rather than just doing lane surface improvements, more and more cities are relying on overall replacement of roads. That is, of course, more expensive, but importantly, that impacts businesses more. It requires folks to detour around city streets. It closes main streets as folks are not able to access businesses. So certainly the impact is more than just on the infrastructure of our roads. As many of you know well, it's impacting local economies and preventing communities from thriving.
So the map on the left here shows pavement conditions across our state highways today And the map on the right shows our projected pavement conditions in 10 years without increased investment in preserving our pavement. Couple of items to note. Right now, as I mentioned before, 87% of our total state highway pavement is in fair or better condition. However, when we start to zoom in on specific areas, we can see that isn't true across the entire, like that isn't true in key areas. When we zoom in on the Portland metro area, for example, which is shown on the map, we can see that the pavement conditions today already trend towards poor. This is particularly true of high volume local highways where traffic volumes are heavy and paving is substantially more expensive. You can also see on the 2036 map that without increasing our investment in pavement preservation, conditions will severely deteriorate. And we're expecting that as soon as 2030, we're projecting that on the state highway system, we're going to see twice as many miles of poor condition pavement as we do today. So we aim to resurface pavement on higher volume roads every 15 to 25 years. And we are right now, the average age of our pavement is 30 years of our concrete pavement, and asphalt is 18 years. So we're already in this in the spot where things are deteriorating rapidly. And as was I think Nicole mentioned, as it deteriorates, the cost to repair increases. So if we wait too long, we can see the cost to bring it back be 2, 3, 4, 5 times more expensive depending on that stretch of road. So that is certainly something that we're also very cognizant of. And I had the opportunity yesterday to sit down with a maintenance crew in Yoncalla that works on highways 138 and 38 between I-5 and 101 and 101 in the Reedsport area. And they spent most of the hour talking to me, re-emphasizing that to me with some concrete examples. So that is, I think we see that across the system.
If I can stop you for just a minute, for the committee, just to inject my own experience here. The thing I'm worried about is that people don't understand that liability that's coming. And I've seen this presentation before, and I think we need to go a little bit deeper and take a timeout to find a bullet or something that we can use to explain the problem a little bit more, spend a little more time on it, because that growing liability, when I was stunned when I saw the fair condition, because fair is just about poor and you've got no money to invest in it except on the interstate, we are going to slide dramatically. And so if we will become a population that won't address the problem until it's really too late to do it affordably. And the governor mentioned affordability, what she said, not just for the taxpayer, but to do it in a smart way. I think we need to quantify it. I don't think we've quite hit it yet with what I've seen here. And it's a huge, it's like saying your kids are going to go to college and not planning to save any money to get them there. For you to sit there and say, we're only going to pay the interstate in the next budget, lets me know we're in a panic situation that we don't get yet. So
I'd love in that if it's possible to get it overlaid with key freight routes and then key tourist routes. I think when we talk about economic development and transportation, freight is the easy answer, but tourism is the key part of that. And then given how critical safety is as part of ODOT's transportation plan, something overlaid with key safety corridors.
that will help us translate it to individual legislators.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I don't know if there's a comparable thing for cities and counties. I know a lot of places have done.
So it's I appreciate the flag of looking at key freight routes and tourism. For bridge conditions, Oregon ranks 16th in the nation for bridge condition, which doesn't really sound bad. However, the distribution of poor condition bridges around the state is like pavement. It isn't equally distributed. While most of our 22,786 bridges are in fair condition, On the interstate system, less than 0.5% are in poor condition, but on US 101, 16% of our bridges are in poor condition. And those US 101 bridges are, many of them are historic bridges. They're critical crossings, and they are exposed to more extreme weather conditions and are take more care and feeding every year to preserve. In most of those cases, those are bridges that we wouldn't necessarily look to replace, but we need to continuously take care of them to keep them on the system. Replacements across the system are rare. We're really focused at this time on preserving the bridges that we have, which is a combination of ongoing maintenance. Our major bridge maintenance program is a substantial portion of how we take care of our bridges. We do many preservation projects and rehabilitation projects, and taking care of the bridges is a combination of those four things: the maintenance bridge, major bridge maintenance, rehabilitation, preservation, and bridge replacement. In the interstate bridge building era, Oregon was building an average of 66 bridges a year, and that occurred for about a 15-year period. In comparison, during the OTIA 3 effort, we were, which was our most recent significant bridge investment period. We delivered over 250 projects, which were a combination of replacements, or about 170 replacements among those 250 over 10 years. So not nearly the same scale of bridge projects as happened during the interstate era, and we're definitely, the interstate era bridges are coming to in some cases are approaching that 75-year life, original design life. And so that is on my mind every day. And one of the things we're seeing on the ground with our bridges, in terms of what folks experience, is many of our bridges are weight restricted. That impacts freight and freight routes. That also impacts emergency vehicles and routes that emergency vehicles need to take. We are seeing more bridge maintenance that's closing lanes of bridges for periods of time, which also impacts traffic, impacts communities. And that is on my mind daily, as we spend less money on replacing bridges. We're putting more money into major bridge maintenance, and we're having our maintenance crews do more of the daily, weekly, monthly work. So I think that's.
Yeah, a little bit more for counties. Thank you, Tova. Echoing a really, similar experience and challenges for counties. Counties specifically own about 3,500 bridges over 20 feet. That's close to 50% of all non-federal bridges in the state. Only 32% of county bridges are in good condition or better. And counties actually own 76% of the total structurally deficient bridges in Oregon. Almost 1,987 county bridges, maybe more by now since the stat was taken, but are load rated or weight restricted for heavy trucks. That's almost 30% of all county bridges in the state, which, similar to what Tova described, that means that heavy vehicles are rerouted. That's emergency vehicles, school buses. For a lot of county roads are farm to market or ag and timber roads. So that's a big effect on those industries in particular. So it's definitely a big impact on communities, especially those more rural communities, as well as emergency response in the economy.
Mallerie, help me understand. I've heard emergency vehicles several times. Which emergency vehicle is so heavy it can't cross a bridge? Just in my head, I mean, the very largest fire truck probably doesn't exceed.
I'm not an engineer, so I'm gonna hand
It's primarily fire. It's fire trucks with certain configurations.
And the spread of the axles. With the newer fire trucks are spreading their axles and then putting boosters, set them on the outside, on the inside. So it is a weight distribution on the bridge, and you would be amazed at how many of those restricted bridges you travel every day and don't know it. It is a big number.
And I've been told that it's a bigger problem with some of the wildland firefighting vehicles.
It's a big issue whether it's wildland fire, which is wildland fire could be our backyard.
Right.
So,
Particularly.
but in reality, it affects everything. I was driving, just through the Dalles and off one exit and, crossed a emergency vehicle restricted bridge right off of the intersection.
Just to add, if I may, I was told recently that the new electric fire trucks are very, very heavy.
Very
And with the batteries, et cetera, and that they cause a lot of damage to the roads, let alone the bridges. So I just wanted to add that.
Something you didn't mention, Tova, which is not just about the coast, but the detour routes are often like 150 miles to get around, but particularly over the coast. When we had a bridge go down and it's schools on one side, communities on the other. So it's 150 miles to try and, put something back. And I'm sure that's the same, if you're out in one of the rural areas, the detour routes are considerable. So if the backup plan is not a very good plan B there.
Most detour routes have weight restricted bridges too, is the problem.
And I don't want to belabor what has been said, because I think you all are hitting on the key points here, that it's a safety issue with our bridges. It's a daily frustration issue with weight restriction for freight, and certainly a frustration issue for folks that need to detour around bridge repairs, those sorts of things. What I do want to emphasize here is cities might not own as many streets or as many bridges as counties in the state, but we rely incredibly on those bridges. They help connect folks to their schools. They help connect people to business, to recreation. And when our partners are struggling to maintain their bridges, it has a disproportionate impact on cities. I'm thinking of my own route here and the bridges that I drove on, and the jurisdictions that own them. They might not have been cities, but it was required for me to get here into the city of Salem. And just want to underscore the shared transportation system that we've been talking about today. The jurisdictional ownership is nowhere near as important as the person that needs to get from point A to point B.
So I'll talk just a little bit more about specifically to counties. I think local governments shared some challenges when it comes to resources for addressing this pretty massive bridge liability. Resources for county bridges are almost entirely from competitive federal grants. These are very unstable and it's unreliable funding, which is very concerning. A significant portion of county bridges were built between about 1950 and 1970. This corresponds to when timber harvest revenues were very high, which contributed in large part to county road department budgets at that time. These bridges now, 50 and more years old, are showing their age, and the rate that they're deteriorating has increased precipitously over the last 2 decades. It was mentioned a little bit earlier by our co-chair, but I'll call it in the Willamette Valley region and the North Coast region, so outside of the metro counties, about 45% of all of those county bridges are load rated and weight restricted for heavy vehicles. Over the next 5 years, counties alone project an additional $320 million needed for capital bridge projects and $91 million just for bridge maintenance, and an outstanding need.
Okay, we'll transition away into safety next. And I want to talk a little bit about the trends and the data that we're seeing and the significance of the challenge of safety. And I'll talk a little bit about where we are in terms of ways to improve safety in the state. So if you look at the chart in the top right there, you'll see that generally our fatalities and serious injuries in the state of Oregon have unfortunately been increasing in recent years. The last 2 data sets in 2024 and preliminary 2025 show that that's dropped slightly for fatalities in particular, but serious injuries have gone up. It's about split 50-50 between fatalities and serious injuries on the state system and on the local system. The chart below, which again is going to be hard for you all to read, you'll get this presentation later, but I'll just kind of go over that quickly. So the bars, the dark blue bars, are the proportion of fatalities and serious injuries attributed to that particular factor or location. The red numbers on the side are how much that's increased or changed since the 5-year average. So what we see from the data is that the majority of fatalities and serious injuries happen at intersections, and they happen from roadway departures. So a car crossing the center line or completely going off the roadway. For things that are involved in that, the top issues we see are speeding and impairment. So alcohol use, drug use, or polysubstance, multiple of those things. Any one crash can have several of these factors be true at the same time. It can be in an intersection speeding with somebody that's drunk driving. This is a pretty troubling and sobering chart. So what this shows is the rate of fatalities per vehicle mile traveled. So traffic deaths per use of the system. 1 is good, meaning there's few traffic deaths on the system based on how much people travel. So Oregon at one time ranked as high as 12th. You can see that we've dropped very significantly, and we're now ranked 43rd of all states in the country for safety on our roadways. So the problem's significant. Problem can't be ignored. There are things, real actions that can be done that help address safety. We often in the industry talk about the ease of safety, engineering, evaluation, education, enforcement. All of those are important in solving the problem. As we talk about some of the top types of crashes at intersections, there are real and meaningful things we can do to address and to improve safety. So roundabouts, for example, can reduce the risk of crashes by 78 to 82%, very significantly make a change. The table on the left shows countermeasures for roadway departures, so things we can do in transportation to reduce the risk of those fatalities. Those are very much impacted by all of the rest of the system and some of the things that you just heard in terms of pavement condition and bridge condition. So striping is a good example. We add durable, highly reflective striping when we pave. That's when we can do that. If we're paving only interstates in 2027 and beyond, we're doing that in many fewer miles. Therefore, then we're relying on our maintenance staff to come in and stripe when they can. There's a very short seasonal window that they can do that. And if the budget decreases, staff decreases, there's fewer people that can go out and do that. That is huge. You know, our Oregon weather, the visibility of the sides, the center line are super important for that. Rumble strips is another great example where you actually have to have your pavement in good, fairer or better condition in order to add rumble strips. Once it goes poor, you cannot add the rumble strip to that. That can reduce fatalities and serious injuries by 23%. Huge life-saving thing. So all of these things are tied together. Safety is a challenge. There are things we can do to make a difference and support our travelers.
Just a little more on county roads. Just to call out some specifics to rural roads. So most county roads are rural, and rural roads, both state-owned and local-owned, are 75% more dangerous than urban and suburban roads. So this is due to several factors: limited cell phone reception, which causes delays in emergency response when we're even making that call. Those roads typically have a more simple infrastructure or design, and then there's maybe more speeding or impaired driving on those. And many rural county roads in particular were simply not built to modern standards. And so they are too narrow to even accommodate those most basic safety countermeasures that Amanda was talking about. Implementing them would require widening the right-of-way just to put those safety countermeasures in there, which is just cost prohibitive for most local jurisdictions right now.
Thanks, Mallerie. Transitioning now to some of the more multimodal aspects of the transportation system and biking and walking. I talked about this earlier in our statewide plans. There are gaps in the bicycle and pedestrian system. If we look at the state system alone in urbanized areas, we're missing over 2,000 miles of sidewalks. You may think of cities, especially Portland, as being a really walk, bike friendly community. High proportion of people do that comparatively across the state. And yet, even just looking at a subset, their high priority connections to transit, to schools, to things like that, they're missing 40% of sidewalks and 72% of crossings. So there's a gaps in the system, those directly tie to safety like we were just talking about. A lot of those investments can make a real and meaningful difference. There's a couple quotes up here from community members who receive Safe Routes to School funding. You'll see one from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation talking about the importance of that to their community, to people that choose to bike and walk, to people that have to bike and walk to get to their destinations, and other community impacts as well, from communities of really all size.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add on that, we think of Portland and we think of folks walking around in the community, but certainly in rural communities, cities, city cores are incredibly walkable. Folks might drive into the city core and then walk around. And pedestrian safety is important to our cities. It's important to our local economies. One thing I would note, cities, LOC estimates that cities have an annual maintenance gap or delta in funding of about $633 million. So that makes funding projects like sidewalks, like bike lanes, all that much more difficult when they're not able to keep up with the day-to-day maintenance needs of the roads they maintain. From Walmart here to Ontario, cities across the state have leveraged the Safe Routes to School program. And I will say in the reductions that ODOT took this last session, this was the most painful one for cities. A lot of folks have projects in the waiting. They've gone through their planning grant stage and they're ready to come in for dollars. And unfortunately, those dollars are limited or in some cases not there.
Transitioning now to public transportation and transit, we've seen a dip of ridership from the pandemic, but some post-pandemic recovery in that. We have about 20% of households that use transit at least once per week. So it is a utilized and kind of visible mode and important in the state of Oregon. You heard Kelly talk earlier about the State Transportation Improvement Fund, or STIF. That is the major kind of groundbreaking funding source for transit in Oregon. So the map in the lower right shows kind of the proportion of funding. So some agencies, you'll see the darker proportion of that circle, they very heavily rely on the STIF funds. Others have the state funding, the federal pass-through funding, as well as kind of local levies and taxes that make up that bit. But focusing on the STIF portion, that's the payroll tax, about 0.1%. It's a unique fee in that it's really indexed. It increases over time. The challenge, though, is sometimes that's not keeping pace with things. Think about the fuel prices right now and how fuel inefficient a lot of transit buses are. We have some electric, we have some hybrid, but still fuel costs are really impactful to transit agencies. So we're seeing some already cutting service, others projected to in the near future. So STIF super important since its inception. You can see all the wonderful and amazing things it's done. 17 million rides to elderly and disabled. So accomplished a lot, and yet still not quite keeping pace with all the needs that exist out there, especially as our population grows and especially as our population ages. And we think about aging population often in urban areas. It's a lot of our rural areas that really have some transit dependent needs out there. Okay, last just kind of needs, I wanted to just preview some other things. We talked about freight. Freight moves the Oregon economy, super impactful. When freight moves slow, our economy slows, right? So congestion is an issue, is something we need to pay attention to. In Oregon, we have some of the top 2 bottlenecks in the nation. Those include the Interstate Bridge and basically the Rose Quarter area. So those are recognized nationally as an area where freight really slows, really impacts economy. You'll see there's some costs attributed to those impacts of slowing to both industry and to people. The other side of things, we've been so heavily focused on infrastructure in this presentation and a lot of discussions, but I do want to talk about the other side. There's an enabling side of licensure, of the customer service that we have to provide to the public in their travel. So using the example of the Department of Motor Vehicle Services, DMV, some of the challenges they face even today are around office closures. There's ad hoc office closures that happen now. Primarily that's because our staffing hasn't changed in 25 years. The same number of staff serves a much, much larger population, which means the staff in each office is pretty small. If they're out sick, anything else, we're having to close some of those offices. That's going to get worse as the funding declines, which you'll hear a little bit more from Travis on, and we're looking at potentially closing between 15 and 20 offices in the future, given the budget cuts that we have. So that means real impacts to real people, right? So for anyone that needs to go into the office, you're traveling a much longer distance to get there, longer wait times. We'd likely have to even restrict the type of services that we offer in office, moving those to mail or online. That's going to put a huge demand on those systems and going to further delay our ability to get out these critical services to our constituents. So all of these things, and I think this actually goes, Co-Chair Kernigan and Tyler, to some of the questions you were talking about earlier, what are the real impacts? There are real and measurable impacts of all of these things to the economy. So we've done a report and we're updating that report, which I think Grace is getting to some of your point, which is called Rough Roads Ahead. So what it does is it looks at the deterioration of the system, what that means for weight restrictions, for detours, for closures, and then it estimates our lost gross domestic product, potential lost jobs, all of those kind of things from an economic perspective. And it's not only freight movements, it's tourism. It's a lot of different industries that are truly affected and impacted by poor conditions on our roadways. So real economic effects. Business impacts. Grace, I think you talked about a closure on the coast. This is an example. In 2023, there was a section in Southern Oregon, Coos County of US 101 that slid out. The road was closed for 5 days. And for somebody that's in Port Orford to go to Gold Beach, normally a 30-minute drive, it's a 6-hour detour. You're going all the way back out to Interstate 5, down into California, back up 101. Because of that lost connection, some businesses closed for that time period. Some were irreparably harmed for a long time. So it impacts our businesses too. And then obviously the people. We've heard Nicole talk about the people. You can see it in everything we've talked about. Here is a great example of a disabled veteran from the Newport area, or Tillamook area, excuse me, who the dialysis center closed in Tillamook. The only way that he could get to his life-changing service was to take a bus. And that bus was his lifeline. Transportation is so important to people's lives and livelihood. So we'll end on some key takeaways here and some parting thoughts. Tova, do you want to start with the first one?
Sure. If we don't continue to invest in our transportation system statewide, like the deterioration will escalate and it will be irreparable to come back from that. And I think we've all made that case for the entirety of the transportation system. I think particularly as we talk about our pavement and our bridge assets.
Okay. Nicole?
Yeah, and I'll add, I'll read just what's here because I think this is worth underscoring. More people die on Oregon's roads per mile traveled than in any other parts of the country. Safety has to be our priority. The livability of communities, the health of Oregonians is top of mind for us all.
And while the predominant mode of travel is driving, those multimodal options are important. That was really illustrated in that last quote that we covered.
I think we skipped one, so I'm gonna go back to it and say that not keeping up our roads and assets will cost the public more in the long run because the public will have to pay for full rehabilitation versus upkeep. This estimate that's about a 2 to 6 times increase is an ODOT estimate at the county level. Sometimes that can be up to 16 times more expensive to do that full reconstruction. A lot of county capital projects are actually just deferred maintenance. That road has gone fully beyond repair. Now it's a capital project.
So another way to illustrate this is you think about the roof on your house. If you patch the roof, if you keep it up, if you do the moss control, right, your roof will last longer. But you let all that deteriorate, and that's what's happening because we don't have the money. You're going to have to replace the whole roof. The same is absolutely true for the public and having to pay for our infrastructure.
Freight is impacted by weight restricted bridges and congestion, causing delays that increase costs for businesses impact Oregon's economy. And as we also said, that it's freight and it's emergency vehicles that are impacted by those weight restricted bridges, and the effect is negatively impacting every community.
And I think as the comments were, and as we started this presentation, our transportation challenges are ubiquitous. All of us up here representing different jurisdictions, our tribal partners, others in the state face these same exact things, and it affects our ability to connect people and goods to places, which is our core mission. So these are critical. Any other thoughts from the committee?
Yeah, I would maybe add that you have a hard task in front of you. We're not blind to that fact and of the many, as Kelly walked through, the many efforts that have taken place over the last couple of months, last few years. And certainly we're relying on you. our shared statewide transportation system is at a pivotal point where if we don't act now, we'll have a more expensive problem to solve 5 years from now. And if we don't act now, we'll immediately see the impacts or rather Oregonians will immediately see and feel the impacts. Our businesses will see and feel the impacts. And kids trying to get to and from school will see and feel those impacts as well.
As Nicole said, we're relying on you. I would say that I think you're also relying on us. We're resources to you to answer questions, provide data, examples, whatever you need to have the conversations and do the hard work. So don't be shy asking questions and asking for more information, because we do have a lot of it, as you can see, a lot of data about the state of our system, and we want to share it. And we also welcome input about how else we can be talking about it and describing it to tell that story and make it abundantly clear how important our transportation system is across the state.
To Tova's point, there's a few resources we listed at the end of the presentation. One is ODOT State of the System Dashboard. You can dive in the data that we talked about today and in deeper detail. And there's a couple great county and city resources as well that we point you to. And as Tova mentioned, we're here. We're in this. We're committed. As you are, and we look forward to working with you.
I had a safety question. What is behind the falling of safety to go from 17th to 43rd is incredibly poor performance. What happened there?
Yeah, I think I would say it's hard to say exactly why the state of Oregon, as compared nationally, took such a deep dive. We certainly are seeing increase in driver distraction. We're seeing a huge increase in the polysubstance use in the state of Oregon with alcohol, drugs, marijuana, etc. That are
other states.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Compared to other states?
Compared to other states, I can get back to you on the more specifics of how we trend different. I would say the biggest issue that we're seeing is our rates of serious injuries are very, very high compared to other states. And we've gone into the root data and we're not quite sure why all of that is happening. So we have a couple of research studies that are diving into that a little bit more deeply on why we're seeing such troubling trends in that direction.
So what is seatbelt usage? What's our percentage?
Seatbelt usage in Oregon is actually pretty high compared to the nation. It's dropped a little bit in recent years, but it's still one of the top states in the country for seatbelt usage. I would say speeding tends to be a pretty high factor for us. And speeding is really not the posted speed limit. It is the exceeding the posted speed limit. And so we're seeing a pretty high number related to that, maybe correlated to rates of enforcement and some of those types of issues, but that's what we're diving into more.
Just want to build on that. Amanda, is there any data that talks about the year of the vehicle in the accident as compared to other states? Because it seems like all the data you see nationally is the newer the car, the less chance of injury. I mean, because of airbags and all the other safety built in. So I'm wondering about the year of the vehicle in the accident.
Yeah, I know for sure, like our average age of our vehicles in Oregon is a little bit older as compared to other states. I think we're on average 14 to 16 years that people are holding on to their vehicles. And the newer technology certainly is helpful, but we can look into that and get back to you more.
Committee members, other questions for this panel? Yes.
I don't know who I should ask. There's a lot of experts in the room, but I heard it said that the feds will not allow maintenance. Is that correct? For their funds. So I assume other states have concerns similar to ours. So have the states lobbied the federal government to try and prioritize maintenance as an option?
I think I'm the one that said that, so I'll try to answer. I'm also carrying, it's a little harder to focus online to hear us around the table. And hoping that helps. But I think what in Travis will speak to this in his presentation, there has been we're behind in the conversation at the federal level as well. So kind of a significant reauthorization. And we do those needs are expressed, but the capital needs that they're carrying are also intense as well. And so I'll let him kind of cover why the feds do or do not want to invest in services, but in general, it is much easier, as you know, to pay for capital and to issue debt for capital than it is to give resources to pay services.
It was part of the deal when the interstate system came in that the federal government would help build it, but the commitment on the state's part had to be to maintain it. And I think that's why you see the maintenance, commitment on paving. You have to maintain it in a certain condition in order to continue to get the funds that are there, but that's up to the states to pitch in.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to this panel. We very much appreciate that. I think if we will, 10:50 by my watch, maybe take a 10-minute break and 11 o'clock. Grab it, give you time to get prepared and ready, and we'll start back right then. timely, for getting back on time. To our audience and to our members here, I want everyone to know we've heard some comments that the audio is a little bit difficult. I talked to Travis about that. He's going to point that mic directly at himself. And as our committee members speak or ask questions, lean in, find a microphone so you're directing your voice to the microphone to the benefit of all the folks that would like to listen and be a part of this meeting. We want them to be able to clearly hear us as we go forward. And we want to practice this because this is not the last of this opportunity you will have. And we want people to think we were good at it, not struggling the whole time. So Travis, thank you for being here, and we'll get started with you.
Great. Thank you, Co-Chair Hannah. I'm Travis Brouwer. I'm ODOT's Deputy Director, and I'm going to talk to you about transportation funding today. I have to apologize. At the break, I made the mistake of eating a granola bar, and I'm like actively choking on it right now. So if I start coughing, just ignore me. I'm very good at making a mess of things. So I'm a little bit of a transportation funding nerd. So I have to admit also that I probably got a little overexcited when Kelly gave me this assignment and put too many slides in here. So I may not get quite to everything today because I think it's more important that I take this nice and slow and hit the some of this in more depth, particularly around the state funding where you're really going to be engaged. I know that some of you around this table are experts and know a lot more than I do on some of these topics, like Julie on transit or Commissioner Doran on local funding. So I'm going to try to take this as sort of a mid-level because I know some of you are also, it's maybe the first time you've seen this, while others have seen this, dozens of times and are going to be really bored about it. So point being, if I go too fast, or you need me to go into a little bit more depth or have any questions, just like with all the other groups, please just stop me and ask me to give you a little bit more. I'm going to focus on how Oregon funds transportation, starting with state funding, with the State Highway Fund, as well as state multimodal funding. I'm going to talk a little bit about local road funding, and then if we have time, I will get into a bit about federal transportation funding, although obviously we have no real impact on what the federal government does. Just like Amanda and Tova and our local friends wrapped up with some key takeaways, I'm actually going to start up sort of bottom line up front. What are the major challenges and issues on the transportation system when it comes to funding? Now, I'll note I've got data that will show you a lot of this. Ultimately, this is sort of an interpretation of that data. And so I think it's important for this group ultimately to define what those challenges and issues are. So please dig into this, push back on any of these. What did I miss of the list? Because I'm going to walk through these for you, but ultimately it's going to be up to sort of you to determine, what are the major issues and challenges that you want addressed. So let me just walk through these briefly. One of the things we've seen, and the previous group showed this a bit, across the road system in particular, construction costs have increased rapidly. And the State Highway Fund has been and will be eroded because our revenue sources aren't inflation adjusted unlike a lot of other taxes. But the gas tax also is facing basically a 1-2 punch because not only do we have inflation, but we're seeing growing fuel efficiency is eroding the fuels tax. We have a pretty good, well-balanced revenue portfolio in Oregon, but we lack a lot of the funding sources that are used for transportation in other states. We've also talked a bit about the challenges between operations and maintenance versus capital construction spending. And what we've seen is that, or what I'll show you today, is that we have a lot of debt in ODOT's portfolio that will constrain our future funding because it has gone to capital projects in the past and we're paying it back now. And that the statutes that direct how ODOT spends the State Highway Fund share that we get put most of our money into construction projects. And that's forced some pretty significant budget reductions in maintenance and operations. One other piece, Kelly talked a little bit about the requirement for equity between light and heavy vehicles. Our last highway cost allocation study and several before that showed that there was an imbalance in what was paid. And so that showed trucks are overpaying and light vehicles, passenger vehicles are underpaying. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about how local governments are highly dependent on the State Highway Fund, largely because they lack many effective local funding options at the city and county level. We'll talk a little bit about how state funding for other modes of transportation is relatively limited in comparison to what we see on the highway side. And if we have time, we'll get into a little bit about the real significant challenges at the federal level where we could see a real significant drop in funding. So let's start with the State Highway Fund, which is our largest single source of transportation funding. As with an investment portfolio, anytime you've got a revenue portfolio, you want to have well-balanced sources. And that's what we are shooting for in Oregon. We have what I like to always call a four-legged stool that is fairly balanced. And although each of those legs is just a little bit wobbly, as we will see. So we rely on four primary sources: the fuels tax on gasoline and to some degree on diesel, because we actually don't charge trucks currently a diesel tax. They pay the weight mile tax. Heavy trucks in Oregon pay more than in any other state. It's designed to make them pay their fair share, as we'll see. They pay a weight mile tax on every mile they drive, as well as registration fees. At the DMV, you pay for registration and title fees. And then, starting in 2027, we are going to be the first state in the nation that levies a per mile road usage charge on the most fuel efficient vehicles. Just as we were the first state in the nation to charge a gas tax, we're going to be the first that really actively is shifting away to charge those vehicles that pay very little in gasoline tax by the mile. So while we do have a pretty good, well-balanced portfolio, there are a lot of taxes and fees that other states use that we don't use in Oregon, and that causes some challenges. So, for example, inflation indexing. Most other states now have some method to adjust their gas tax based on the cost of gas or on inflation. We do not. Most other states use tolling to pay for major projects. I was looking in Washington. Last year, they collected over $230 million in toll revenue that is used for their major capital projects. That was the intent of HB 2017. And yet, as Kelly noted, people didn't love that so much. And so it's no longer going to be an option for Oregon-only projects. Other states, a lot of them use a vehicle sales tax or a vehicle ad valorem tax. Some other states have sales taxes or other sources. We're highly reliant, we have none of those, and we're highly reliant on user fees in Oregon more than the average state. And so as a result, we don't have much in the way of general fund going to transportation, particularly roads. And so that really does kneecap us in some ways. As a result, we do an annual analysis of Oregon's vehicle fees compared to other states. When we did this after HB 3991 passed, it found that we are once again the lowest state in the West among the seven most westernmost states, other than Alaska and Hawaii, because they're a little bit different. That includes red states like Montana, Idaho, and Utah, although we're really close to Montana, just because most of those other states have other of those revenue sources that we do not have. We just published our most recent revenue forecast. I think it just went online this week, and it is based on current law. So it doesn't include all of those taxes and fees from HB 3991 that were subject to the referendum. So this shows you over the next 10 years what we project will happen with revenue. It's really interesting to see that if you look at our three traditional revenue sources, the truck taxes from our Commerce Compliance Division, fuels tax, and DMV, overall, they are going to decline going into the future. And this is before we adjust for inflation. It is only with the addition of the road usage charge that we're going to have some growth in the state highway fund. But it's less than 1% per year. So less than the rate of inflation. This chart shows you our state highway fund going all the way back to 1998. Go back in the way back machine there. Grace, I think you were director of ODOT at the time. That was not what I intended, but I did in fact step in that. So if you go back to 1998 and look at the time frame here, you see the state highway fund's grown a lot. But then when you actually adjust for inflation, looking at our costs, you see that the state highway fund has already declined by about 27% since 1998. And going forward, we project that revenue won't keep up with inflation. So we're going to see a 16% real reduction in revenue by 2035. The reason of that is that all of our revenue sources, all four of the legs of that four-legged stool, are eroded by inflation. When you look at most taxes, sales taxes grow as prices grow, property taxes grow as property values grow, although in Oregon, we obviously have some constraints on that. Income taxes grow with income, payroll, et cetera. All of our taxes are set at flat rates that are continuously eroded by inflation. So over time, it's just a natural occurrence that you will see they buy less and less over time, unless and until the legislature raises them. As I noted earlier, there really is a 1-2 punch, though, on the gas tax, and that is with growing fuel efficiency. So inflation is, hitting it on the one hand, and then so is fuel efficiency. Since 2009, Oregon's passenger vehicle fleet's fuel efficiency has increased by about 27%. That's a lot of people buying hybrids and electric vehicles, but it's also just buying more efficient internal combustion engines. A couple of years ago, I traded out my beat up old minivan for a Subaru that got 30% better gas mileage or uses 30% less gas. And so I get a big tax break out of that in a sense, paying less in fuels tax. So what we have seen is as a result of that, this chart shows you how taxable fuel sales were going up until 2018. They peaked in 2018 and have been declining by about 1% per year. Big drop in 2020 with the pandemic, as you can imagine. But the long-term trend has been downward by about 1% per year. That actually is great in a lot of ways. I mean, that is consistent with our environmental commitments. That's saving Oregonians money. And yet it means that our main revenue source in the fuels tax is being compromised by both inflation and fuel efficiency. Now, we talked a little bit about road usage charge. Over time, you'll hear a lot more about that. The legislature in HB 3991 shifted high efficiency vehicles to RUC. So all electric and hybrid vehicles will start paying in waves coming into the program starting in 2027. That's going to help ensure that hybrid and electric vehicles pay their fair share, but it won't do anything about the fact that we've already lost a lot of revenue, and it won't address those internal combustion engines. So I'm going to continue to get that tax break on my Subaru compared to my minivan, and we'll just see that across the entire fleet. There are a couple really interesting and unique provisions of the Oregon Constitution that we always need to give you in our sort of funding 101 presentation. So the two really are, they're both in Article 9, Section 3A, and these have been approved by the voters of Oregon. The first is that all revenue from taxes on fuels and any tax or fee on ownership, operation, or use of a motor vehicle can only be used for highway purposes, which means, state, city, county, maintenance, preservation, capital, all of those things, as well as administration costs. So that is what we call the highway fund restriction. And that's great in a lot of ways. It means that we have all of the funding that comes in from the highway fund goes into transportation. There can be no diversion of that money. It also does limit what we can do in some cases. So it makes it a little bit harder to fund some of the multimodal transportation. The other important provision that's enshrined in the Constitution is that taxes and fees between passenger vehicles and heavy trucks must be fair and proportionate to their costs based on a biennial highway cost allocation study. This is something we do every 2 years. The Department of Administrative Services does it. Many different stakeholders, probably including some around this table, participate in that. The last several of those studies showed that light vehicles are underpaying. What we do in that study, it's incredibly complicated math that I do not even come close to understanding. But basically, we look at how much is each class of vehicle projected to pay compared to the cost they impose on the system. And you want to get to a ratio of 1. If everybody's at 1.0, then people are paying correctly. If you're above that, it means you're overpaying. So what we saw in the last one, light vehicles are underpaying. They're at about 0.9. Heavy trucks are something like 1.23. And so they are overpaying. HB 3991 would have rectified that by raising light vehicle fees and really keeping trucks fairly similar. But obviously the referendum on some of those light vehicle fees has likely put us back out of balance if those are not sustained by the voters. So we'll rely on the next highway cost allocation study, which will be done early next year, to show us whether this issue persists. All right. You have heard a lot. Commissioner Doran mentioned the State Highway Fund is a shared resource, and it's 50-30-20. It is split between ODOT, counties, and cities. And since 2009, we have been diligent in splitting the additional revenue from the funding packages 50-30-20. Although there have been exceptions and carve-outs and off the tops and different formulas, et cetera. The reality, though, is the State Highway Fund is distribution is incredibly complex. There are actually 7 different formulas for each different tranche of revenue as it was passed by the legislature over time. So the revenue in HB 2017 has certain carve-outs, as you can see on here, and then is distributed 50-30-20. There is an overall distribution of 56% to ODOT, 26% to counties, 18% to cities. This chart, which is just a tangled mass of spaghetti up there, was actually designed to simplify this distribution and make it easier for people to understand. It only proved that it is almost impossible to understand and becoming difficult to calculate. In fact, I won't go into any depth today, but HB 3991 actually broke this system because of the way they got rid of the weight mile tax, or reduced the weight mile tax on heavy trucks and shifted them over to the diesel tax. We can no longer allocate funds per what is actually written in law, and we're going to have to come back and figure out how to fix that. So we'll put that in sort of the parking lot to deal with later. All right, so Kelly already showed you this chart, but one of the major challenges that we're facing as an agency, and cities and counties are facing as well, is just lack of funding for basic maintenance and operations. I want to give you just a really clear distinction. When we talk about operations and maintenance, we are talking about the day-to-day work that ODOT crews do, especially our maintenance crews that go out there patching potholes, plowing snow, fixing guardrails, picking up dead deer, all of those things that are the day-to-day work of the state to keep roads safe and open to traffic, the same things that our local partners do as well. That is maintenance. Preservation is the actual capital spending we do, construction projects that we will contract out to the private sector primarily to go do an overlay on 20 miles of highway. Whereas our crews are out there, maybe patching potholes on a couple miles, or maybe they're doing a chip seal on a few miles. That, there's a distinction between maintenance and preservation. As we noted earlier, we can use federal funds only for capital funding. That does include preservation. So we're using it to repair and rehabilitate and replace bridges. We can't use it to go out and patch a little pothole on a bridge. So there is a clear distinction. What we're really short on right now is the funding for operations and maintenance. And that's because over the last 25 years, since the first OTIA bill was passed in 2001, the vast majority of the money that comes to ODOT has been dedicated by statute to capital construction projects, either through the issuance of debt, through bonding, or just directly. So you can see that little purple slice is 2% of HB 2017 funding can be used by ODOT for maintenance. We've got another chunk of about, a third of the funding from that package that came to ODOT that is used for projects, but we cannot use that for just the day-to-day maintenance. So we're facing the situation of this year having to potentially, lay off our crews that do just the most basic work out there on the road.
I've heard a lot of folks say we've got enough money in transportation, and they reference this chart, and then they say, so we don't need to raise any more money. But the big ad from the past is that yellow quadrant that was raised specifically for transit. And is not, it is eligible to be spent on roads, I suppose you could say, but it is not, in the old funding, there were no transit dollars in there. This is the first time it's been added. It looks like a big chunk of money. but it was not in existence before, and it is not a highway-oriented use, right?
That is all correct. And it is directed by statute to public transportation. I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. A lot of these areas, Kelly touched on this, and I'll mention in a moment, but in February, the legislature redirected $218 million from other transportation funding sources. They didn't touch transit. They did redirect on a one-time basis, some of the Safe Routes to School money, some of the green money there, the ODOT Fix-It funds, as well as the named projects in the bill. So they use a variety of those funding sources to redirect into operations and maintenance that were not available for ODOT or the Transportation Commission to do that, because they're all directed by statute, though not by the Constitution.
Travis, in its original form, HB 3991, how does that change that percentage allocation dedicated to ODOT maintenance?
HB 3991 actually did not have any dedications to where the funding was going. So the intent was to use all of it, every single dollar, for operations and maintenance. And that was really the first time that we had that ability since 2001.
If that came to fruition, what percentage would be towards ODOT maintenance? You know that number?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. We'd have to look at the totality of ODOT's budget. And now that those funds have been suspended, but as it goes to referendum, I don't think we actually have that calculation quite ready. But yeah, we could look at that. Yeah, what we're seeing over time is that over time, more money needs to be spent on just basic operations and maintenance as the roads age, and on preservation. As Tova mentioned, a huge portion of our bridges, in fact, the majority of them were built before 1970. So now we're talking, the average age is well over 50, and we're starting to get to that place of needing regular ongoing day-to-day maintenance, as well as regular major preservation projects on them.
I have been, and I guess we have to talk about it, but like big picture structural approach, my thinking is often we as an Oregon and the feds have built a system that was focused on expansion in terms of the way we fund things. And we are now shifting to a world, at least in Oregon, where our focus has to be on preservation and maintenance, and to some extent infill, making sure that the gaps within the networks are connecting. Is that really big picture as this committee thinks about this? Like we are part of potentially making that shift?
I would tell you that in Oregon, we probably made that shift earlier than other states. We have traditionally been a fix-it-first state, where Amanda mentioned in our Oregon Highway Plan, we have something called Policy 1G1, which we will probably beat into your skulls multiple times, which is basically preserve the system first, look for efficiencies, and only then look for expansion. That's something that's really been in place, probably since Director Kroniken's time has been the case, that we have been focused more on fix-it. I think we sort of led the way, and now it's interesting as I go to national conferences with our fellow brethren state DOTs at the AASHTO conferences, more and more are in the same place. And I think less and less of the funding is going toward capital expansion. But yes, I think at the very least, the focus should be on maintenance and operations and preservation. And that has been our direction, and probably even a further move in that area.
Yeah, because it feels like that may have been our policy, but that has not been our funding structure.
I think there's some reality to that, especially if you look actually, that's a good transition into looking at debt. In several of these packages that I'll talk about in terms of debt, there were major modernization projects funded using debt as a way. And that was particularly the case in the Jobs and Transportation Act of 2009, which had $960 million of named projects, primarily modernization, interchange expansions, wider highways, lane, et cetera, as well as in HB 2017, there were quite a number of additional projects: Oregon 217, the Bend North Parkway, Aurora Donald Interchange, the Rose Quarter, et cetera. So, turning to just talk a little bit about debt, we have received direction from the legislature really over much of the last 25 years to use debt to pay for a lot of our construction projects. And much of the funding over that period has gone into that. I would say we've used debt reasonably and prudently. In fact, we've got good credit ratings. We've got a AAA rating from Standard & Poor's, which is actually higher than the state's credit rating. We've issued over $4 billion in highway user tax revenue bonds. That is paid for things like the $1.3 billion OTIA 3-state bridge program that Tova talked about, that replaced or rehabilitated something like 280 bridges across the state. It has also paid for dozens of modernization projects across the state in those Jobs and Transportation Act and HB 2017 programs. What that's left us with is over $200 million a year in annual highway user tax revenue debt service, which is about a quarter of ODOT's total state highway fund dollars. So again, reasonable and prudent amount. We've bought good stuff with it, but it also means that it constrains our current and future spending going forward. I will note this chart shows the debt we currently have on our books. However, we do anticipate that we're going to have to sell additional debt for some of our major projects like the Rose Quarter, I-205 Abernathy Bridge, Center Street Bridge, and that will mean that number both goes up in the next several years, and it will fill in some of that reduction you see after 2035. It looks like we're going to get a major sort of, debt free up in a few years. The reality is that will just extend out over time. So we're not going to see a lot of money freed up.
Travis,
Mhm.
real quick, going back, combining the last pie chart with this,
Mhm.
what's the percentage of the gas tax that's bond loaded? And what's the percentage of the total revenue coming in to ODOT that's bond committed?
There's probably about 5 ways to look at that. Our total budget debt service is about 10% of our total budget. But that's all forms of debt service, including lottery bonds,
Right.
et
I guess
cetera.
what
So-
I'm asking really, how much general fund is dedicated to bond guarantee and how much of the gas tax percentage?
Yeah, very little general fund. We have had
what
basically
I meant.
one instance with the interstate bridge replacement where the legislature gave us general obligation bonds and one small issuance of general obligation bonds in 2015 for just $35 million. So almost all of our highway project debt is funded by the gas tax. About 25% of ODOT's total state highway fund goes to debt service.
Well, how much of, if you had a 10-cent raise, how much of that 10 cent would go straight to operations and maintenance, and or straight to the maintenance operations preservative, and how much would go to debt?
Well, ultimately, that is up to the legislature every time they raise funding. So in HB 3991, a 6-cent gas tax increase, reg and title fees, every dollar was going to go into operations and maintenance and none into debt.
But in 2017, they authorized certain.
Yeah,
amounts.
it was fairly extreme,
Yeah.
extremely high.
Where does the bond, do you allocate 50% to the locals and 50% to ODOT, and then ODOT pays for the bonding, even if the bonding that was done on OTIA was on a city or county road?
It's a little silly and strange. It actually goes back
I
to
didn't go there either.
I'll try not to give you the long version of this, but when we look at where's that silly spaghetti chart? I think I went too far. It's different for every single package. So for example, in OTIA 1, the legislature took some money off the top and said that goes to debt service for both ODOT and locals. In OTIA 3, they took some money from ODOT and from locals, and then said, ODOT, you issue all the debt so that local governments don't have to. Otherwise, most of the debt has come out of ODOT share. So what happens is, overall, within the State Highway Fund, we take the cost of collections at DMV and Commerce Compliance Division off the top. Then we take some stuff off the top that goes, to major projects, safe routes to school, debt service. What's left then is split 50-30-20 between ODOT and local governments, except it's not. It's the 56-26-18 or whatever. So this is why, you know, when I show you that spaghetti chart, it is complicated and very difficult to explain.
Okay, get you back on track.
Yeah,
Sorry.
my apologies.
No mind.
All right, so I will go forward and, you know, so we talked about debt. We talked about how the statutory dedication has led us to where we're at. What that really means is that the overall result of putting most of the money into construction projects and into debt for construction projects has put us in a shortfall of funding for maintenance and agency operations. And that has forced us to take growing reductions each biennium. You know, starting back in 2019, 2021, when we first kind of ran short on cash, we started taking reductions, and that has grown over time. By 25, 27, our current budget cycle, we've taken about $230 million in budget reductions this biennium. Some of that was actually voluntary, that we went to the legislature and said, we're going to cut our own budget. And they obviously then put that into the law. Others were legislatively directed. So this last fall, or sorry, last legislative session, when they redirected $218 million, they actually also said you get to take $78 million in budget reductions that are included in 25, 27 there. So the challenge is that next biennium, that funding gap only gets bigger. That red bar will go further and further down. Now, we're building our budget right now, so I don't have a number for you. In about a month, we will know what that shortfall looks like for next biennium. Suffice to say, we expect it will be very large because our costs are growing with inflation and our revenue is flat or declining. So that is, you know, opening up, we call it the, you know, the alligator chart when we show those, and the alligator's open mouth is only getting wider and wider over time. So if we do see that same situation, you know, as Amanda walked through, we'd have deep cuts across the agency. The last biennium, we were looking at about 1,000 jobs across the agency, about a 20% reduction in workforce that would hit our maintenance crews that are out there plowing snow, hit our DMV offices, and we'd have more closures, et cetera. And really challenging to deliver projects because we pay for some of our project delivery staff out of our operations and maintenance dollars as well. So I'll pause there. That's the end of the State Highway Fund section, and see if there are any other questions before I move to multimodal funding.
It's like you go right ahead.
Okay, great. So let us talk about state multimodal funding. This table shows virtually all of the state funding sources that we have for our non-highway programs. And as you can see, overall, there's a lot less than what goes into highways. The biggest source by far is that payroll tax that goes into the statewide transportation improvement fund for public transportation. We also have what is called the transportation operating fund. We affectionately call it the lawnmower fund because it's derived from the non-highway use of fuels that are taxed, like your lawnmower or your leaf blower or, you know, heavy construction equipment, other things. That is all transferred into the transportation operating fund. We use it for any sort of non-highway program. And that's everything from the voter registration programs we have at the DMV to regulation of household good movers for consumers to passenger rail, off-road paths, and others. So very broad funding opportunity there. There is also a vehicle dealer privilege tax on new automobile sales, 0.5%, so $5 for every $1,000 in vehicle price. That goes into the Connect Oregon Fund for rail, port, and aviation grants, and then a small portion, either 6 or 7%, goes into the Multimodal Active Transportation Fund for off-road paths. The custom license plate fee is what pays for a big chunk of our passenger rail Amtrak Cascade service between Eugene and Portland, with service on to Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia, along with a chunk of that transportation operating fund, the lawnmower fund. And then last but not least, this is a little tiny itsy bitsy amount of money, but the HB 2017 created a $15 fee on new adult bicycles that goes into that multimodal active transportation fund for off-road paths. So that is just about all the funding sources we have for those that aren't federal or local in nature. The biggest of these, as I noted, is that statewide or the payroll tax that goes into the statewide transportation improvement fund, 0.1%, so $1 on every $1,000 in payroll. The STIF also receives a little bit of money from the cigarette tax, ID card fees, and the TOF. The good thing about this one, as Amanda mentioned earlier, is revenue increases about 5% a year on average as population grows and wage increases grow as well. So this is a good steady increase. It's really our one tax other than that vehicle dealer privilege tax that does adjust with inflation. All right, so that was the end on multimodal transportation funding, because frankly, there's actually not that much to cover. There is 8 more layers of complexity because it gets really interesting how we try to bring those funding sources to mix and match them using federal dollars, et cetera. So any questions before I move on? Yes.
Whenever I see something at the local government level that brings in less than $1 million, I want to know how much it costs to administer it.
That is an excellent question. And the Department of Revenue administers that. I believe it's something like $50,000 to $100,000 a year. It's relatively low cost. Small number of payers. So yeah, I'll try to go find that actually though.
What about the RUT?
The road usage charge will be a more expensive tax to collect. The gas tax is a ridiculously cheap tax to collect. It's about like 0.5%. Because you're collecting at the point of first sale, use, or distribution in Oregon. And so it's a small number of payers paying, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. RUC is going to be a much more retail transaction, a lot more like a DMV fee. And so we expect that it will be higher, substantially higher. Right now, it's going to take us a couple of years as we grow that program to get the economies of scale really to even to break even on RUC. However, there is direction in statute that says we're going to get administrative costs of 10% or less. So that will help us contain those costs as we work with the private sector firms that actually do the collection of the revenue for us. It's basically a public-private partnership. Thank you. Okay, local road funding. And obviously we've got our friends from AOC and LOC here who can answer any questions that come up. They provided some nice charts that show how much local road revenue comes from various sources. What you see here is counties in particular are heavily dependent on the state for the majority of funding. They do raise some of their own revenue. I will tell you, this looks very, very different between an urban county and a rural county. In urban counties, they have some additional tools that just really aren't available to rural counties in terms of raising any real money. On the city side, you can see they're less dependent on the state highway fund as a revenue source and do raise more of their own money. And that is in part because they do have more tools. I didn't go into actual numbers of how the different amounts of revenue that come in because it's kind of hard to track. But there are a number of other local revenue sources that local governments make use of. So for example, there are 2 counties and more than 30 cities that have a local fuels tax. All 3 of the Portland metro regions counties, but none other, have a vehicle registration fee. There are a number of fees like utility fees, parking revenue, development fees, property tax. Those are generally limited to cities. There are some, weird little outliers like Washington County has a property tax that brings it's 95% of all county property taxes going to transportation actually comes from that one county because it was kind of grandfathered in before all of our property tax limitations. There's some general fund money, lodging tax, and other sources. But it can be very difficult for local governments to sort of cobble together the resources to maintain their transportation system. We just saw City of Portland yesterday passed a utility fee, $12 per month per household. That actually, interestingly enough, is almost exactly equivalent to what each driver pays in the state gas tax per year. So you can see that amount of money is actually really impactful for a city if they can get a utility fee of that nature. Any questions about local revenue sources before I move on? Okay, let's talk about,
Travis,
oh,
I want
yes.
to just do a little process check. We're at 11:41. Don't know quite how far you got to go here.
2 more.
Okay, but let's be expedient and be cognizant that we have another presentation to come. And if you have a whole bunch of questions, Travis, you can always write, email. I'm sure there's other ways that we can get there, but we do want to try to stay
Yeah.
on task.
If you'd like, I can just actually stop here, or I
No,
can hit the last 2.
I just want to do the
Okay.
process check so we know where we're at.
Yep. All right. So let's talk about Uncle Sam and what we get from the federal government. Each year, Oregon receives a substantial amount of federal revenue. That's over $700 million a year from the Federal Highway Administration. This chart shows that and shows the increase we got in 2022. We also get about $150 million a year in FTA formula funds for transit that mainly goes to the urban areas. There's some safety program money, and then there's additional opportunities to apply for discretionary grants. That funding was boosted in 2022, but what's really scary is 5 months from today, the federal transportation program expires, and there is no authorization of those programs beyond that time frame. Why that's scary is because the Federal Highway Trust Fund faces a really substantial shortfall beginning in 2028. It's about $40 billion per year. And if Congress does not take any action, then federal funding could fall by about half without additional revenue. Over time, the money flowing out of the Highway Trust Fund has grown substantially above the money flowing in from the user fees, which is almost all the gas tax at the federal level. And so Congress has had a number of general fund infusions, but it's not clear they're going to be able to continue with those general fund infusions at the level we would need to sustain funding going forward. So this is a particular risk for us, and it will mean that in many ways we're going to be on our own and can't really rely on Uncle Sam to come provide us salvation with our transportation system. And that was it. Happy to end on such good news with the federal level.
Well, that's a big one right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was it, 2028?
2027, there's an initial shortfall, and then in 2028, the general fund infusions run out completely, and we have to rely on the revenue coming in.
For almost 30 years, and they've managed to
Yep.
figure it out, navigate it every time.
Since 2008, they have shoveled in several $100 billion of revenue.
Passport fees.
That's the same, we're just going down, we're not shoveling in any more from the general fund. Let's.
Yeah.
I digress.
Okay, that's all right. Travis, thank you very much. We
You're welcome.
very much appreciate that. Very nice presentation. And with that, let's get back together and start talking a little bit with Kelly about our Workgroup Charter so that we all kind of know that we're sailing the ship in the same direction.
Thank you. I would like to let you all know you have watched your last PowerPoint presentation of today. Thank you. Those were dense. And we have gone I like this order. I think this order shows you the direction and charge of this group to want to dig into the details. But it's also a little interesting because right now I'm going to remind you why you're here, why this group was formed, and generally what the schedule looks like for you moving forward. So that is all contained in the charter document, which I believe you all have printed out in front of you and will be shared online for our viewers out in the world outside this room. So your purpose is to help develop a framework for a comprehensive transportation package that can move forward in 2027. The way that will happen, however, is through a report. You were formed by the governor. You are working on a report that will be delivered to her by the end of this year, early in December, is when that work should be completed. Specifically, we've talked a little bit about this, but just for everyone watching at home, there's the governor. She established you and is giving you this charge. And then you also have 6 subgroups that are working for you, for all of us, to be the technical experts and sort of the engines of the content of this report. We have one that's on maintenance, preservation and emergency management, one on transit, one on major projects, one on freight, one on community livability and safety, and a final one, which is our Finance and Funding Committee. And I want to talk about that one just a second because I have folks raising their hand all over the place to join that one because I think that's the hot one. That should be, and we will aim to have that be the most boring of these committees. They should be the calculator and the generator of the information and the numbers that you need as you go. And so we're in the process right now of forming those groups, establishing and assigning key stakeholders and technical experts to lead those. There will be a work group member assigned to each one. I will be reaching out to you to see if you are willing to serve in specific capacities so that we have that connection. And we will make sure that they can come to you also on a regular basis to get feedback and to engage on the work that they're doing. So now that I've gotten through the structure, let's go back to the purpose piece of the charter for just a second. And I am going to go through this bullet by bullet here, just because I do think it's important that we're all grounded in these items in particular. So the first charge, the component of this report will be assessing current service levels across all modes of transportation and evaluating how these conditions align with legislatively adopted performance measures. Reviewing and synthesizing how historic transportation spending trends impact current service levels. I believe you probably feel like you got some of that today. That's what these presentations were designed to do. The next is to review the current and projected financial condition of the major transportation funds, including the Highway Trust Fund, which currently provides equal funding to state and local transportation systems, and the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, which helps fund public transit across Oregon. Where are we and what is our financial ability to manage to those services and performance measures right now? Third, evaluate how Oregon will perform against existing KPMs and the goals set forth in Oregon's transportation plan at currently adopted funding levels. Compare Oregon's system condition and funding tools to other states. I'm going to pause right here because this is a place we have a question posed and some feedback I got on the charter. There was a request made to actually compare Oregon's system condition and funding tools to other states and make it its own bullet. I actually think that makes sense. Is there any concern with making that change to the charter as you guys? Is that okay?
What's the reason for wanting to make it its own bullet? It can't fit in there the way it.
I believe it's to just make it intentional. We've included it throughout the comparison throughout, but just making sure that as we're doing this work, we not only understand where Oregon is, but how other states are performing in relation to that, just calling it out. If anyone wants to speak to that. Yeah.
And it was basically looking in the last 2 years, there are a bunch of other states across the country who have had similar work groups, who have had similar charges. And I thought it would be particularly helpful for us. The Oregon way is important, but sometimes we get a little mired in our own Oregon-ness.
I don't care if it's a separate bullet. I think we should do it, but that's fine. That's where you want to go.
Okay, maybe just thumbs up if you're okay with making that change.
Fine.
Great. Okay, so that's number 3. You'll end up with 5 bullets because we'll make that its own. And then the last bullet really is the heart of the work that you're going to do. So you're going to develop a tiered comprehensive transportation investment framework that supports economic development, affordability, and a safe, accessible, and reliable transportation system. This framework should also identify opportunities for operational efficiency and funding simplification. Does anyone have any questions with these purpose bullets before I move on to other changes in the document?
Why is tiered in there?
Tiered is in response to sort of what you saw coming through when Amanda showed you the tiered investment strategy for the Oregon Transportation Plan. The problems that we are encountering and you'll continue to see are vast. So having a tiered approach so that when we leave here, there are options to move forward, not just one. I've heard that would be helpful from the governor's perspective and the legislature's perspective to have options within the framework.
I heard the governor describe it as you've got these set of problems and you've got these solutions, and knowing that if you made this investment, the tiered part is if you made this investment, you'd accomplish this much of what you wanted. You made this much investment, you'd accomplish this much, and so on, so that you'd have a range. And time is part of that, but also quantity that you're going to use to address the whole thing.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to move into the background from here. I'm not going to read everything. I'm going to highlight the changes. So and the background points to three issues, which you heard Travis really hit on today about why we're in the situation that we're in. That number one is related to gas tax revenue. It currently reads, long the primary source of transportation funding in Oregon. It has become stagnant as cars become more fuel efficient and EV use increases and burdens working class families as cost of living rises across the country. We received feedback from a few different folks that we're assigning all of the affordability issues to people on the transportation system to the gas tax. It just reads honestly kind of weird and it's inaccurate because there's a lot of different ways that people are paying for the transportation system. So we propose to just delete that last piece. Affordability is still a guiding principle for this group, but the way it was drafted was confusing. Any concerns with taking that out? Great. All right. So I'm going to move on to page 2. This is, we start to get into the scope and schedule and the guiding objectives. On the scope and schedule, I just want to remind you all, and for the folks that may not know this out at home, we're working, we're trying to meet no more than once a month at this table, and then also produce a report by the end of the year. You're going to see that start off the way that we are today, which really the informational items that you all need to ground you in this work for the first third, start moving into making sure we understand our priorities and the problems that we believe we really need to tackle into that second third. And then the final third really will be putting those problems together with solutions and creating the framework. All right, so no changes to the scope and schedule. Guiding objectives. We had titled this Measures of Success. You'll see, I'm going to read the change here. I'm going to tell you why the change. So when you look through, I'm going to just go through them. So it's support progress towards bringing our existing system into a state of good repairs, number one. Improve safety of all users. Avoid increasing fees and other charges that disproportionately impact low-income Oregonians. Support transportation investments that strengthen economic vitality and improve the lives of Oregonians. Address the structural revenue issues plaguing our transportation system. Invest in systems that serve all Oregonians across all travel modes, including transit and multimodal infrastructure. Number 7, respond to and address the needs and concerns of transportation leaders in the Oregon legislature. Sustainably fund core ODOT maintenance and operation services on an ongoing basis. Strengthen accountability and oversight over state transportation funds, services, and programs. And lead to actions taken today so that Oregonians do not face bigger and more expensive transportation problems later. I read that to you because the overarching request that I got was to switch from the verbiage of measures of success to guiding objectives. And that is because these are all very important things that we will move towards at certain varying degrees of success, right? But we probably tomorrow or not, at the end of this, will not have perfectly addressed all these. And so it sort of sets up an unfair expectation, I think, for how we grade ourselves at the end. So if you all are okay, we will switch the terminology from measures of success to guiding objectives. Any concern with that?
Kelly, I'm not concerned with that.
Okay.
The piece on low-income Oregonians.
Okay.
And this is maybe it's my rural nature.
Yeah.
But typically, people who live in rural area are underemployed, and therefore wages tend to be lower in rural areas than in urban areas. And so by just calling out the economic piece of that, you're also leaving out rural Oregonians who, when you raise the gas tax proportionately, so you're taking out disproportionately, but they're paying a higher share than somebody who travels to work 7 miles, but they live in rural Oregon, 17 miles from the mill, or whatever the case may be. We might still want to massage that a little bit. I don't know.
Do you have a specific change you want to make?
Well, I think rural is by nature, it's what it is. I mean, they're going to go further to work. And so are we okay saying it's okay charging them more, but if they're low income, they're not? What if they're both? I mean, you live in a rural county.
No, that's absolutely. I mean, rural Oregon pays a higher percentage of the gas tax just because we travel further. So it's a good point. I don't know what the answer is
I don't
to massage it. I think
Suggesting that it say ensure that rural and low income Oregonians are not disproportionately impacted. Is
I
that
think
what
that's an
you're saying?
option. I just don't know how everybody else feels about it. I guess if you only live in an urban area, maybe you're not concerned about it, or maybe you do get it when I'm saying it. I don't know. I mean, I just think by saying nothing, rural Oregon likes to be heard. We do, yeah. I mean, but
Just practically, when you put a gas tax in, you're not thinking of doing something complex to give them a discount
no,
or in some way. So what do you
yeah.
acknowledge that?
I think
Or-
you're just acknowledging
I think
it.
it's a recognition
Yeah,
more than. an
just like it is for the income side. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
you can have low income in urban areas and you're not gonna affect them very much. You could have low income in a rural area and you might affect them a bunch.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's gas tax or what it is, we travel further. Proportionately, rural Oregon's gonna pay more for that privilege.
But isn't that a choice people make?
Definitely.
But I'm not sure that's where we wanna go either.
I think it's really difficult sometimes, this conversation. I think that, you know, if you focus more on you're paying for the use of whatever is in your community. So people that live in an urban area, they're paying for a bus pass, or they're paying a different way of getting around. I lived in rural Oregon and Montana for many, many years, and yes, you do drive more, but there's trade-offs to all of this. So I don't know how we get to where we just start saying that people who use our system, one way or another, it may be an Amazon package that's delivered to actually driving it.
Well,
It's the user of the system.
I agree, Julie, or Chairman. What if we just eliminated the low income portion of it?
I was
And
wondering.
just make it a
Well,
baseline
because the
state.
governor, I mean, Kelly, it's up to you to explain, but the governor really went out of her way to tell us that the income base, it has to be an issue. We need to acknowledge that that's the governor talking.
But could you say ensure that no, this gets wordy, so, but like no particular subset of Oregonians, including low-income families, rural Oregonians, elderly Oregonians are disproportionately impacted because we're.
But then you're gonna
have.
it's gonna be disproportionate just by design.
What if you just left the three the way it is and you added a bullet that says, acknowledge that rural Oregonians, and then whatever it is you want to say on top of that? So that it's in our consciousness.
You guys are the smart ones.
Yeah, right. I'm just speaking up as a rural Oregonian. I mean, listen, I just think and yeah, we make a choice to live in rural Oregon. And I think it's a great one, honestly. But, you know, to disproportionately say you're gonna pay more, I mean, we could also, I mean, you could turn that table around pretty fast and say, when we're paying the excise tax on payroll, most of the spending's happening in downtown Portland, not in Umatilla County. I mean, so there's always that conversation. We always have to have it. I think it's some acknowledgement that, you know, title fee might be the same to everybody. Right? I mean, title fee or the RUC, as you call it, that could be the same to everybody, because it doesn't matter where you have it. Start paying gas tax. Well, no, the RUC wouldn't, because
you travel more miles.
because you
We've got
travel more
that
miles,
conversation,
yeah. It gets complicated, and I think we got time.
Is there any room on number 7 to say respond? I don't want to diminish the legislature, but including rural. So respond to address the needs and concerns of transportation leaders in the Oregon legislature, including rural. Those representing rural areas.
What if we recognize the unique needs of rural transportation? Or, you know, what if we recognize, I mean, there is something unique to living in other parts of the state. Maybe if we can add a sentence to that effect, we're not only working to not disproportionately impact low income, but we're also recognizing the unique. Oregon is unique. It's big, and people need to travel long distances. Is that how?
With bullet 3, just have a second sentence there. Or what do you
I
propose?
think that fits. That's the place it goes, is to
Great.
acknowledge it. and we don't need to beat it up, so. Sorry to hold you up, but I think there's a place to say something
Yeah.
positive in that vein and.
Right. Okay. I think I know, but you all deserve to see words on paper. So what we'll do today is I'm going to work on that with Susan to add that component about just recognizing the fact that we do have different types of needs between urban and rural throughout Oregon, and that our final framework should recognize that fact, right? Great. But the basic change, moving from the avoid increasing fees to the ensure low income, that was fine for folks. It's just incorporating the rural piece is what I'm hearing. Does that sound right?
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, there are no changes to the public engagement section, although I do want to call out, this is continuing to evolve, and just like today's meeting, you'll get feedback. I'll get feedback on how it worked for people and how people are, how easy people feel like it is or is not to tell us what they want to tell us. So I just want to ask for your grace in advance to continue to make sure we're evolving how we let people communicate with us so that we really can hear from folks throughout. Right now, we have a website, we have an email address. And we're going to continue to add more pieces, surveys, and other things as we go. I already walked through this structure, so we're not going to go into that again. If you go on to page 4, we have I already walked through the subgroup members, so that's not new. The one edit you see is we have been calling this committee Community Livability and Safety, but the charter didn't call it that. So we added safety. Pretty easy, right? And then membership expectations. Let's see. This is where Susan, I might need to phone a friend. It says, what do you want me to cover with this piece? Okay.
I had a request because it says in here, members are expected to represent the perspectives of their organizations and areas of expertise. And I think many of us are here because we have different organizations and different hats we wear in different places. I don't think it needs to be in the charter, but I think this is maybe a question for the co-chairs. If there are specific constituencies or specific viewpoints that you want to make sure we are bringing along as individuals, I just think it's worth being clear about it. I think in my notes, Susan, I was like, I serve on the transit board. I live in Portland. I grew up in Central Oregon. I get around by bike, but I also drive, and I drive an electric vehicle. Like, which of those constituencies am I here bringing to the table? So
I want to just express, I've had a chance to talk to just a couple of you, but my interest is in educating the general public as to what's going on, and maybe start with the constituencies that are represented around this table and in the working groups. And it's my hope that when you go back to explain to your group, when the AAA goes back to explain to their board what's going on, that they explain the needs of the whole package and that they think beyond the constituency they have. So however you define yourself, we need to own what the truckers are facing. We need to own what the transit people are facing, and so on, the road users. So that as we go back, we don't take just our own limited interests. We have to start with this committee, and we have to start with the working groups, I think. So I think your obligation is to bring your best talents forward here, but to also take away and go out and spread the gospel, the whole gospel, not just your version of it, I guess.
Chairman, spheres of influence and constituency can come together, but when I think of where I'm going to make change, it's within my sphere of influence. And I'm not sure if that's a term that would complement.
feels more comfortable. I was, because you and I had chatted, and that resonated with me more, and that lines more with the sphere of influence than constituency. Constituency makes me just feel like we have specific things that we're delivering on, and I think we are all representing broader space, broader sphere.
Great. I think the broader is better.
Well, and my input there is just for the two of us anyway. I mean, I think constituency isn't here, it's here, if that visual works. I mean, I can't come here and say I'm only going to talk about transportation because I run a fleet of trucks, or hospitality because I'm in the hotel. I can't come here thinking that from these chairs. I have to come here and say, what does a package look like that we can go back to the legislative body with, that they have a chance of moving through the system that makes roads safer and more usable? I mean, that's my thing. So, you know, I think we all come with some constituency. Both of us do. I mean, but you're gonna have to be a whole lot broader than that, or I think our chance of success is very limited.
And
If
I
you
think-
only go back and talk about bikes or environment or trucking, or, I mean, and that's where all the focus is. This group will be sitting here 2 years from now doing the very same thing. You're gonna have to take those hats off to a degree and get real wide.
I agree, and I think my concern was this language felt like it was pushing us in the other direction.
I see what you're saying.
Thing just that might help, and it may mean we should adjust this a bit, but for you all, and the governor was highly involved in, the you that's sitting here today are here because you wear multiple hats. So you are different than a lot of the folks that are serving in the subgroups. You are here because you bring different perspectives to the table across, I mean, co-chair Hannah, multiple business owner and legislative experience, all those things. So you're here, it is important, but slightly less of an important issue for you all than it is for the subgroup members. We will be drawing a pretty bright line in the subgroups. I'm just going to be honest that if you are in that room and you are representing a named entity as a part of those conversations, that what you are bringing forward represents the views of those organizations. You are in a slightly different place. Does that help?
Kelly,
Yeah.
just think about this, or let me read it.
Yeah.
I mean, change one word in here.
Sure.
What if you just said, members are expected to present, instead of represent, to present the perspectives of their organizations and areas of expertise, which we're all doing.
Right.
And collaboratively toward shared recommendations. I mean, that means
Yeah.
you're presenting your area of expertise and the organization you came from, but you're still working towards a greater, I don't know, it might work.
Does that work for you all?
Does that help you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. We will make that change. I've crossed out represent and it just says present. So that's no, please, actually, this is very important from the outset to everyone understand kind of what you're being asked to do and how you're being asked to do it and make sure you're okay with it. Okay, let's go to page 5. Just want to highlight here that we are striving for consensus at this table. And then we have a communication section. You all are going to be talking with a lot of people, and that is great. We actually need you to talk to a lot of people. When there is a need or a cause for someone to represent specifically the view of the committee as a whole, that you would then work with our press team, the governor's press team, to help make sure that we can get that information out on behalf of the committee itself. Does anyone have any concerns with that?
But what does that mean logistically for Chair Brown over here? Gets a reporter, asks her a question. She's both the head of the OTC and member of this committee. What would you expect of her?
Right, that's great. Yeah, and that's a good example because Commissioner Brown's in the hot seat. So I'm gonna use all 3 of her hats, right? So because she's not only the chair of our commission, she's on this body and she's the head of a transit district. All of those things will come into play here. It's about if she has her transit district hat on and she said she gets to say whatever she wants to say as herself as the transit district anytime. If she's being asked to comment as a member of the Oregon Transportation Commission, specifically about OTC business, she has a process that she works through with ODOT on that she would follow. If she's being asked, hey, Commissioner Chair Brown, how do you think everything's going with this committee or this visioning work group? She would have some leeway again to speak to her individual perspective in that. But if she was asked, can you tell me what's happening? What do all the work group members think? What's the next step that's going to take? That starts to kind of go into speaking on behalf of the work group itself and the purpose and the next steps of the work group, which really does sit with the governor's press team. Does that make sense?
Just to me.
Okay, any questions about that?
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. We don't want, you are here because you are very smart and capable people who are some of our best spokespeople. So it's just a way to try to help manage.
You're asking for coordination,
yeah.
and the answer back might be, leave that to the press person, or
Right.
it might be, go ahead and say
Send it
this
to you.
about that.
Yeah.
got a paragraph that we're all agreed to, so
Right,
feel free to articulate it.
perfect. Yeah,
Is that clear to everybody? Feel
Great.
comfortable with that?
awesome. Thank you all. Okay. The initial meeting outline, I won't go through that meeting by meeting, but you can see that there are 7. And we've reserved the right to hold one extra, if we need to. I would like not to, because you all are busy, but that's that. We had originally talked about moving these meetings around. Right now, we are planning to have them in Salem and be in person, is the direction that we're headed in right now. Any questions or concerns about that?
Should that be here?
So I'm gonna,
Consistency.
yeah, well, let me know how I would like to hear.
That's my recommendation,
yeah.
be so that we get used to the routine, where to
Right.
park,
Okay.
where to meet, where to go, rather than moving it around. That would be my preference.
That's helpful. Thank you. Any other thoughts or ideas about? Here's good.
Just speaking of the sound and move up.
Right. Why don't we, and I'll look at my local government friends and other folks too. We are in an ODOT space, so I just want to continue to remind everyone that even if we continue to host meetings in an ODOT space, that it's a system-wide conversation and that we may move up or down if that helps address some of the AV issues that we heard about today, but it'll be in this building moving forward. Great. That's helpful. Any questions about the meeting outline, the topics, anything before I move on? Okay, there's no more edits in the rest of the document. So you've got the work group membership. You all know who you are. These are the bios as well. We will soon be adding the leadership of the subcommittees. I'm almost done with that. We have, again, worked to provide a little bit more role clarity in terms of, well, actually support resources, just so you know what we are here to help you with. It is my job and the Office of the Governor's job to make sure you all know why you're here and what is expected of you, and that you have access to the resources and people and talent that you need in order to fulfill that objective. Susan, you all have met Susan. Susan Peithman, is the project manager. So she was helping to coordinate any consultant resources that we have on the project, and that she also will be a lot of your day-to-day communication and helping make sure you have what you need on that end.
Susan, before you go on, would you mind sharing with us your vision of how you think the working groups will interact with this group?
Oh, I believe, so I think I'll take that one. We have, if you go into the meeting outline, set points in time where we are asking them to come in and talk to you and present specifics. So you're gonna be providing them a set of questions and things you need them to do, and then they're gonna come in and be here and be talking with you and ask and giving you the update on the conversations they're having in terms of meeting your needs. So it'll be iterative. Yeah, but ultimately the report is yours.
During these scheduled meetings.
Yes.
And how about the participation of folks here in those working groups?
Some of you will be assigned to be a work group liaison to those groups. And I will, I haven't actually asked many of you that yet. So we should be reaching out to those folks. I don't want to say their names right now because it may not work for them, and to see if you're okay to serve as a work group liaison to each individual subgroup. Yeah. And so that way you'll have that direct connection as well. You'll have not only the work group members and the chairs, it'll be the chairs of each one of those that are in here quite a bit to talk to you. And you also have a direct connection point back from a work group member for all of them.
Patrick's assigned to be the subcommittee liaison to working group 1, but he really is very curious about working group 3 and what goes on there. Is there anything wrong with Patrick attending those meetings? You expect him not to?
Oh, I have no concerns. Yeah, no, I have zero concerns. You all can go to as many subgroup meetings as you would like. Yeah. Yeah.
All those meetings.
It depends. It depends on each. So I'm just going to out that Chair Brown is the work group liaison to the transit subgroup for obvious reasons. And she and the chair of that, who is going to be Jameson Outen from Lane Transit District, will decide how they meet and how often they meet. Right. So whether it's virtual or in person is somewhat up to the team that's going to be leading that work. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then last but not least, then we're done, committee support. So you not only have the technical expertise of the state and our local partners helping, we also do have JLA, Brandy. Is she over there? Brandy, yeah. Brandy is an amazing public engagement and facilitation expert who is here to help not only us, but our subgroups through conversations when that needs to occur and just helping make sure we're open and accessible to the public. And I believe we also have one other consultant and I'm forgetting. Okay, and then parametrics is also helping us with the actual drafting of the report. So we are really going to try to keep you focused so that you can use your brain space and expertise and experience on tackling difficult issues and that we can support you with kind of the day-to-day and logistics and the drafting components. Any questions about anything in the charter? Okay.
Okay.
Thumbs up. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, no
Yeah.
questions on the charter. You've seen the draft for meeting dates and so forth, which is out in front of us, which we're trying to find everybody's schedule and make that all work, which is not always simple with the group this size and busy, but we've, I think, gotten fairly close. So we're working through that. Very much appreciate everybody attending. Hopefully for those who have been online, including Ted, that the audio visual piece is gotten better or improves as we go. So to your point, Kelly, I guess if we had to move upstairs or downstairs, we could work on that, and we'll be glad to take input so that we know how well that's going. Grace, any further comments?
I just appreciate the participation of everyone. I think it's gonna take a lot of work, and I appreciate you making the trip to be here. Mr. Chairman, you got work into flying here, and
Well,
I just appreciate all the dedication you've shown.
It's all good. We appreciate the governor coming this morning. You can pass that on to her. We didn't really get to say that as she was leaving, but appreciate that, and we'll watch for input and reaction from her and as we move forward. So with that, without any other questions, I think we will adjourn.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.